This is the shrapnel of an exploded star. And this is a meteorite, Steve, from over 4 billion years ago. And this is what Elon will kill for.
Wow.
And all of this is to understand that fundamental question. People want to know, how did we get here?
And how does the question of God tie into all of this?
Well, for the first time in history, we might be able to answer that question with scientific hard data.
Brian Keating is an astrophysicist and professor
whose groundbreaking research and digestible explanations uncover everything we want to know about the universe and what lies beyond.
Let me go way back. 400 years ago, a genius named Galileo looked through a telescope, and he realized that we are not the center of the universe. And now we know the universe is vaster than you or I can comprehend.
How big would Earth be on this table?
Small.
Not even a grain of sand.
Even in our galaxy, it wouldn't be a grain of sand. But we still don't know how the universe began. And so one experiment took me to the South Pole, to the bottom of the planet, and we thought we discovered the creation of time and space itself. It took me to the brink of a Nobel Prize, and we were on the front page of every newspaper. But it turned out we didn't see that at all. What we saw was, and we were crushed. I don't get too emotional, but we had to retract these discoveries, and it was the most crushing experience a scientist can have. But you cannot stop doing experiments to answer these questions.
Now you've launched this $200 million project.
Yeah, and the data that this experiment is seeing is exquisite. Because now we know 100% that
this has always blown my mind a little bit. 53% of you that listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to this show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Dr. Brian Keating, what is the mission that you're on?
I think I'm the luckiest man on earth. I get to get paid, not that much, but I get to get paid to study the questions that I was most interested in as a 12-year-old pimple-faced kid in upstate New York, which is, how did we get here? You know, I think it's the question that people just want to know. It's the only question you can't know, right? What happened before you were born? You have to rely on other people's word for it, right? You have to ask questions and be curious. And what is the only event that ever happened for which there was nobody around to ask? And that's the origin of our universe. And the universe contains everything. It contains life, minds, consciousness, everything down to, you know, podcasters and daily life.
What are some of the most sort of controversial existential questions that you seek to answer with all the research that you do?
So you've talked about this before on the show, the question of you know, finite versus infinite games. And what we do in science is an infinite game, right? You can't win science. But along the way, there's many, many finite games. In other words, fixed competitions for which there's only one victor, right? I got offered a professorship at UC San Diego. That means 399 other people didn't get that job. I got tenure. A lot of people don't get tenure. I got this, I got that. And then eventually I didn't get, spoiler alert, my first book's called Losing the Nobel Prize, but there's only, at most 3 people that can win a Nobel Prize every year. In my field, the infinite game is comprised of many, many finite games. And the most important questions that generate the most controversy, the most heat, the most passion have to do with the nature of the origin of our universe. It's actually not a settled science. It's not actually known for a fact whether our universe came once, existed in a certain way eternally, in a way I can describe, went through cycles of creation and destruction, or it follows sort of a biblical creation narrative. These are all kind of open questions in a certain sense. And because they're not yet resolved, and because the only way to resolve them is through data, we cannot actually answer these. So the human mind is in a hybrid. It's in a superposition. We kind of have a lot of knowledge, but we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of solutions, but we don't have a lot of answers. We're trying to understand that fundamental question. And I always say, I want to know what happened on the Tuesday before the Big Bang. Imagine this, a day before which there was no yesterday. You couldn't even speak about it if you were there. Obviously, nobody was there to witness it. But even conceptually speaking, how does time progress if time starts? All right. We think about time, and time is very mercurial. It's very hard to describe and define what time is. Is time what a watch measures? Is time how my hair gets gray over the years? Is time how we perceive it, sitting on a hot stove versus being with a pretty girlfriend? Are those methods unequal? Are they equally valid? But at its base layer, if the universe began, if it truly had a singular origin, then time came into existence at that moment as well.
And how does the question of God tie into all of this? And what are the sort of, I guess the most controversial question is there a God or is there not a God?
Right.
And then a sub question to that would be, what form does this God take? Are these questions that you seek to answer?
Me personally, yes. My colleagues tend to shy away from it. It's considered somewhat anathema or distasteful for a real, honest to goodness, workaday scientist to talk about, to even contemplate the possibility of God. And for me, I call myself a practicing, very devout agnostic, in the sense that I take my Judaism. In my case, I'm a practicing Jew. But the question of what to take on faith, which in Hebrew, by the way, the word amen comes from the Hebrew word emunah, which means faith. It means to believe in something. I would say, I don't believe in gravity. If I take this rock and I draw, I don't have to believe in it. I have evidence for it. Science, the word science means knowledge. It doesn't mean, faith. It doesn't mean, religion or theology. But for me, thinking about God provides a certain, the most luxurious or the most delightful sort of spice to the research, to the hard work that I'm doing, knowing that the team and I that are trying to answer these questions, we can possibly resolve the question of whether or not the universe began as, for example, it begins in the Torah, the Old Testament, the biblical narrative that underpins the Judaism and Christianity and in Islam as well of, half the world's population. What if we could substantiate that narrative? What if we could refute it? A good scientist has to be open to both. So for me personally, I've always been interested in those existential questions. I don't put myself out there as a rabbi or some exemplar of perfection as religion, but I'm trying to improve. I'm trying to dedicate my life to answering questions that others have posed and stand on their shoulders to hopefully get a closer glimpse of truth. But it's absolutely 100% in my mind inexorably linked. The question of a creator and the question of its creation or his creation, if you will. But as I say, for the first time in history, myself, my colleagues, and I, we might be able to start to answer that question with scientific hard data.
The question of whether there's a God or not and which God is most accurately represented by the science.
Yeah, and the creation stories that those religions tell themselves or tell the world.
You've raised a $200 million project. What does that mean? And what is the question you're seeking to fundamentally answer with that $200 million project?
Yeah, let me take a step back. So for 2,000 years, most scientists, people believe the universe was eternal, had been around forever. And then not far from here in north of Hollywood is a telescope, a 100-inch diameter telescope, 5 meters across. And that telescope was used by Edwin Hubble. Hubble observed that every single galaxy that he could see is moving away from the Milky Way galaxy. So every galaxy, which are collections of 100 billion suns, just like our sun, is expanding away from us.
How could he see that through a telescope?
So he used what's called the red shift. So the red shift is an effect that is related to what Christian Doppler discovered called the Doppler shift. You ever heard an ambulance and it's coming towards you and it gets higher in frequency? And it goes, where? That's the Doppler shift. The waves of sound are piling up. Their frequency is getting getting higher and higher. The wavelength is getting piled up in the direction it's going, the source, and it's getting lower in the opposite direction. The same exact thing happens with light. Instead of getting higher pitch and lower pitch, lower frequency means redder colors. So red is a longer wavelength of light than is blue light. He saw everything is moving away from it, us in the Milky Way. It was a very puzzling discovery. It went against 2,500 years of received wisdom. He observed it with data. It was incontrovertible. Every single galaxy is moving away from the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy. He said either, we didn't put on our cosmic deodorant and no one wants to be around us, or the universe is getting bigger. Tomorrow, it will be bigger than it was today. The separation between galaxies will be larger than it is today. The implication, Stephen, if you go back another day before today, yesterday, things were closer. Keep playing that movie backwards, you come to a point, perhaps a singularity, where all the matter, all the energy, everything that is, was, or ever will be, was concentrated effectively at a single point. That's the Big Bang. And so in the Big Bang cosmology, the universe starts at a particular moment. Time comes into existence. The elements come into existence. All the elements, in water, instead of hydrogen in water, rather, they all come into existence. And then over billions of years, those elements come together over the force of gravity. They will eventually fuse two hydrogens together to make helium and so forth. And you get the heavier and heavier elements. Eventually, those objects called stars, they eventually burn up and blow up in what's called a supernova. And before they blow up, they create all sorts of other matter that we're made of: calcium, oxygen, nitrogen, iron. And in their death throw, in their explosive fireworks-like ending of their lives, they give life to us because they blast out into the cosmos, into the galaxy, the material that we're made of. So literally, as Carl Sagan said, we are star stuff. And I brought some star stuff here today. So these are different byproducts. This is the shrapnel of an exploded star. This is mostly made of iron. Here, I brought these, and I give these away on my website. I made a special website for your listeners, briankeating.com/diary. This is a meteorite, Stephen. Have you ever seen a meteor in the atmosphere? That's a rock like that, a mineral, coursing through our atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour.
How do you know?
How do we know? We measure their velocity. We can track them on radar.
Well, how do you know that this is a meteorite?
This has all the characteristics of a meteorite. Its composition, its density, its structure. It has that weird pattern on it. But if you're really curious, what we could do.
So where does this come from then?
This one was found in Argentina, in a place called the Field of the Stars.
And this could have come from anywhere in the universe.
Exactly. This is basically a fragment of an asteroid that existed before the Earth, Stephen. This is a fragment, a fossil relic of our solar system from over 4 billion years ago, older than our Earth, because our Earth formed at its core. Our Earth has iron inside of it. It has an iron core, just like that. That's pretty heavy, right? And it also made this here. This, if you give this to your sweetheart, if you compress this by 100,000 times and give it to your sweetheart, she'll be really happy about that. That's pure carbon.
So that'll turn into a diamond.
That'll turn into a diamond. I like to say, pressure is what turns dust into diamonds.
For anyone that can't see this right now, it looks like a dice. It's almost identical to a black dice.
It's light exactly. As well. Yep, it's very light. Now contrast that to, and here's a piece of rock. This is mostly volcanic rock. I collected that in Antarctica. I've been to Antarctica twice. To the South Pole, I collected that specimen there. It has holes in it. See the holes?
Yeah.
Those come from bubbling, escaping volcanic gases. So there's volcanoes down at the South, in Antarctica, not at the South Pole. And then here's this one. This is found in Namibia.
Heavy.
So this is a meteorite found in Namibia, also from the same process that formed our solar system. This was found by the natives that lived there several hundred or maybe even 1,000 years ago. This one's particularly nice. If you're not watching, it looks like a human foot.
And I can't explain how unbelievably heavy that is.
Yes.
I don't think I've held something that's this size but this heavy before.
It's extremely dense. It's the dense. So what happens when a star tries to make the iron in that? It takes more energy to make that, fuse that nuclei of iron than is given off in the fusion process. So therefore the star can't support its weight. It collapses, it explodes and rebounds. Now, when your listeners or viewers go to my website and if they win one, you'll see how attractive these things are to magnets. It's a very powerful, it's called a rare earth magnet, neodymium magnet.
Jesus.
And you see, so attach it to the meteorite. It's fine to do that. You can do that.
Wow.
That sound, I love that sound. That ping. So this material is highly magnetic. And iron, which is primarily the constitution of this meteorite, has the exact same chemical structure as in your blood. There's a molecule called hemoglobin. It's almost identical to the chlorophyll molecule that plants have, except chlorophyll has a magnesium atom at the center of its chemical matrix. But in hemoglobin that's going through your veins right now is iron. That iron came from that supernova. Eventually, your mother, and the food that you eat has some iron in it, and then your body starts to produce blood. And that blood has the same chemical composition as the stars.
So this 200 million, what are you doing with it?
Okay, we're going to get back to the money. Yep, exactly. So
what is the fundamental question you're seeking to answer?
So let's say you see someone shooting a gun, right? You want to see but you see the smoke from the gun, you see the bullet moving at great speed, but you'd like to see who actually shot it. Was it God? Was it Mother Nature? Was it some quantum fluctuation in the multiverse? And so we're trying to capture that, to take a picture of the infant universe, to take the earliest baby picture possible, using sensors that are sensitive to microwave light that we cannot see, that's invisible to us. We could capture a pattern which would only be present if the universe had a singularity, if it went through this incredible rupture of space-time called the Big Bang. The details of the experiment were worked out over several years. We realized we had to go down to the South Pole, to the bottom of the planet, a place that was only reached 112 years ago. And the enemy of what I'm trying to detect is water. Water absorbs microwaves. That's how your microwave oven works to heat up coffee. So we took that telescope there. We made an observation. We claim we detected that baby picture, that snapshot, that reverberations of the creation of time and space itself, called inflation. We were heralded around the world that this was the greatest discovery of all time in science, literally. There was just one problem. When we made this measurement, we were aware that we could fool ourselves into seeing what we wanted to see because we knew how important this discovery would be, but we kind of convinced ourselves that we had seen the true birth pangs of the Big Bang. But it turned out we didn't see that at all. Instead, what we saw were trillions and trillions of tons of dust in our galaxy for technical reasons that mimicked the signal of the Big Bang. And we were crushed. It was literally dust. We saw cosmic dust, the leftover byproducts of exploded stars.
I just want to be clear here,
Yeah.
so I'm, I don't want to move on until I fully understand. So you went down to the South Pole.
Yeah.
You looked up expecting to see these waves that show that the universe is expanding.
Yes.
What you actually saw, like lines of dust.
Right.
Is that a simplified way of saying
Yeah.
it? But you thought you'd seen these sort of microwaves of the universe expanding.
Yes, exactly. It's simplifying it perfectly. We made this discovery, and then immediately, effectively in scientific terms, 6 months later, this is in early 2015, we basically had to admit we were wrong. And fortunately, for me and for the universe as a whole, I was very close with a man named Jim Simons. He was a monumental scientist, mathematician without peer, effectively. And he said, Brian, I've been thinking about this experiment, and I want to have a merger. So he put together this dream team, and we're still together to this day. We're building an observatory in Chile, not the South Pole, in Chile, to do what BICEP couldn't do.
BICEP being the telescope you built in the South Pole.
Yeah, that lost the Nobel Prize in my first book's language. And we're just now getting data. It got first light a month before Jim Simons passed away. And so we were able to show him the data that this experiment is seeing. I can't show it to you, as confidential as the diary is. You hope nobody's looking, but you don't know if anybody is. I can't show it to you, but the data is exquisite.
So what do you suspect is the origin of the universe?
Well,
is it God? Is it some kind of strange cosmic reaction that took place for no reason at all? I know you must have a suspicion.
If the universe began with a singular Big Bang, if it began on a certain day or it didn't, I just want to know the truth. The interpretation of it, that's going to be going on forever. I mean, people are battling about, as I said, we thought we detected that signal, right? So we already have a simulation of what will happen when this is discovered for good. Finally, and no dust, right? We know exactly what the media will say. At that time, on one side of the equation were the greatest, religious thinkers and theologians of the time, saying this proves the existence of God, that God created the universe in a singular moment. Let there be light, fiat lux. That's exactly what the Torah, the Old Testament, the Bible says. So they said it agrees with our hypothesis. On the other side, there were militant atheists, Richard Dawkins, other people saying this proves there's no need for a God. The universe came into existence, like you said, meaningless quantum field, the fluctuation out of nothingness. It proves nothing about God. In fact, it invalidates, literally, Stephen, there were people publishing articles in major newspapers everywhere that proves God, proves no God. So it's not like I'm going to think that I have the temerity to say I'm going to be the final word or we're going to be the final word. I know this is going to resonate and echo through the annals of history, but at the same time, we could also see nothing. And that's the hardest thing, when you see nothing. The human mind doesn't like ambiguity. Like you can talk about something very, non-controversial. Let's talk about abortion rights. Let's talk about trans rights. These are incredibly controversial things, right? So what does the human mind do? It selects a side. It says, no abortions. Abortions for everybody. No trans rights. Yes, trans rights. Immigration. No immigration. Yes, the human mind hates that. And for good reason. There's an old Yiddish expression. He who stands in the middle of the road gets hit by both sides of the traffic. So the human mind cleaves to one side or the other. I don't think, in terms of, religion or whatever, that we'll be the definitive final word on it, but it's sort of a privilege to play the game.
What is the most compelling evidence that you've ever encountered that there might be a God?
This is a long question. Well, I hope you'll find it someday too. At least in my religion, in Judaism, God is the creator and he's the organizer. He creates light and darkness. He creates day and night. He creates heaven and earth. He creates beasts and earth and fishes and so forth. And then he creates man. And we can't really emulate God. Even if you don't believe in God, you can imagine what a God would be like, right? You can conceptualize, imagine, King Charles, times a trillion, whatever, like the all-powerful force. But at the same time, we're told God is a father, our Father who art in heaven, right? And he's a Lord. He's like a politician. He's a king. He's their father in this Judeo-Christian concept. It's hard to kind of reconcile what that means because we don't really have analogies to it. But the one analogy we do get is the one thing that we can create, which is a human. Now, I think for that reason, men and women have a stake in what it means to feel a connection to God. Women much more so. It's almost impossible for a man to comprehend what it's like to have the ability to be a vessel for life's creation. I think that's part of the evidence for it. I also think that there's some clues, but again, it's not proof. You cannot prove God exists. You cannot prove God doesn't exist. You have to be comfortable with that ambiguity, and very few people are.
If we came from a single cell organism, as some people say, then giving birth seems to be quite a new concept. Because, if you think about some of the evolutionary stories of, the single cell organism that then divided, and then, Darwinism's theory that it was the environment that defined how we give birth, and different animals give birth or replicate in different ways. So if you go back far enough, it seems that like giving birth as we know it, which is this like process where the baby comes out and they cut the cord, is actually quite recent in the history of consciousness, but also just like living organisms.
Does that make it more or less miraculous? Or
it's so amazing, but it doesn't feel like it gives me, I don't know, there's something in my mind that thinks if a single cell organism, I don't know, a gazillion years ago, split because of some mutation which caused more single cell organisms to split, I mean, I guess it's still creation, isn't it?
And then you could ask the question, what if there was a creator and this creator not only created that first cell, but created within that cell the possibility, the propensity, and had the knowledge, we can't comprehend it, but had the knowledge that will eventually make a person and have consciousness and be able to conceptualize God. Now, I'm not saying that's evidence for it, but just you can see which would be a greater miracle, that like God encrypted in the DNA code that eventually there'll be a Stephen Bartlett or Brian Keating, or that those are natural processes that are the inevitable conclusion of creation of life and evolution, as you say in Darwinian theory, for which we have abundant evidence, right? I don't know which is more miraculous, and that's why
But
miracles.
humans are pretty new, aren't they? So
Oh yeah,
how old-
mammals like egg.
how old is the conscious human?
The conscious, I mean, the first like Homo sapiens that are of our species, probably 200,000 years old, maybe.
So it's only been for 200,000 years that we've been able to think about the possibility of God, which is almost in a weird way. It almost, you could say God has only existed for 200,000 years.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And in fact, many people, and I like to say this, to you, like, what's your favorite day of the year, like on the calendar?
I was
Your
going to say my
birthday,
birthday. Yeah.
Okay. I always ask people that. I say, like, what's your favorite day? And usually I'll get Christmas, my anniversary, my birthday, my first kid's birthday, whatever. But those are all origins. We're fascinated by origins because you weren't there. Like, you can't witness like the whole process of your birth. You have to rely on your mother and your father, and maybe there's some pictures and a nurse. But now go back to the beginning of the universe. Well, maybe there was only one entity. Maybe it was only God. And why did God make the universe? And then, of course, there's many, many questions. The most kind of stringent, or perhaps most challenging question is, why does evil exist? Why would a good God create suffering, childhood leukemia? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So the standard answer for that question is that to not have randomness, to not have chaos, to not have variability in life would necessitate a predetermined existence. And a lot of people believe that. I've talked to Sam Harris on my podcast. He's been on here. He believes strict determinism. Every single thing, what's happening to us right now, the words that are coming out of my mouth, your ear twitching or whatever it's doing, that's all determined. There's no control. There's free will is a complete and utter illusion. And because of that, then there doesn't have to be an explanation of why there's, leukemia in children or whatever. And yes, that is an unanswered question. And I think, but I don't think it's a sufficient question not to do stuff. People would ask, why does a child get leukemia? But they won't ask, why do humans experience the highest pleasures, the highest sensations, both physically, viscerally, but also emotionally and spiritually? That we, unique among all the creations on earth, have this ability to appreciate our finite existence, to have love, to have, whatever these connections are. That's what makes life living. Now, we can't answer why is that? Like, do we deserve that?
So for me, the evil and good and like pleasure and pain make lots of sense from an evolutionary perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of sense as to why you would feel this overwhelming sense of like love and protection when you gave birth, when your son or your daughter arrives in the world, because that feeling is passed down from your ancestors, and your ancestors had that feeling, so they survived and their offspring survived, and that feeling gets stronger as it's passed down because those that have it are more likely to pass on their DNA. So the DNA of that feeling keeps passing through the generation. So I get that, and then with evil, I can also understand that pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if we think of evil maybe as a feeling or as something that happens or a disease, I can understand
No,
that
I wouldn't say
theoretically.
evil's human. Is human related. There's no evil cancer. Cancer's not evil.
And even that I can understand because
Yeah.
I can understand the brain is so fragile, and I can understand all these human instincts and chemicals and jealousy and, even love comes with it. But, if a woman dies, it's probably her husband statistically. So like I understand, that's evil, isn't it? But but it's love as well. So I understand the complexities of all of that. What I can't understand is what active role God is playing in any of this stuff. And and I was religious until I was 18, and then I think I fell down a rabbit hole listening to like Richard Dawkins and some of the others and Sam Harris, and it left me in a position where I would probably define myself as being agnostic, but there's still this big question mark which hangs above my life, which is like, where did human life come from? And is it possible that it just didn't come from anywhere? Is it possible that there was a big bang, at the very start of all of this? It caused lots of reactions. One such reaction was fusing some chemicals, which fused in the right order over millions and millions of years, and it started to move in a way that like plants can't move, and that then led rise to this sort of evolutionary process. And now here I am, and my brain was just bigger 200,000 years ago than the other monkeys. So now that I've developed this thing called conscious, where I can think about things, and here I am trying to figure it all out now that I have this bigger brain thanks to Darwinian evolution. Is that the game? And when people hear me say that, they probably think, the natural reaction to that is because it threatens your sense of like purpose and belonging, and it threatens justice. Your natural reaction to that is, no, I hope it's not. And so let me think of ways that can't possibly be true. But I'm not tempted by that. I'm tempted by figuring out what's true, irrespective of how warm and fuzzy it is. And I still don't know. But I'm hoping science has some answers for me.
Well, yeah, sorry to disappoint. Right now, the connection, that logical chain that you produced has a lot of so-called missing links. But you said something that's very interesting to me. You said you consider yourself an agnostic. And it sounds like, in other words, it sounds to me like you're doing things that an atheist does. Like you're not going to church, you're not, observing mass or whatever you would do if you're. But what do you do? And because if you're an agnostic, there should be some behavior that's similar to a theist.
Why?
Because then you're just an atheist, right? I mean, in other words, what practices, I'm a behaviorist in my life, so I judge people on how they act and how they behave, and you know a lot about this. So how do you behave as if there could be a God? You said maybe you want science to explain it. You didn't say like, I would like to have a personal revelation from Jesus. I would like to encounter him. Or whatever, Vishnu, I don't care what religion is. But how do you, in practice, live your life such that if God does exist, that it would make a difference in the way that you're perceived or judged, if you will?
Yeah, well, I don't, because I guess I don't know what practice, because I don't know what God exists or what story is true. I don't know what practice is true.
Do you think if God, let's say you were Hindu, right?
Yeah.
let's say you're not Hindu. Let's say you are what you are, Presbyterian or the Church of
But
England.
if I had a practice, wouldn't that make me religious?
Well, I'm saying, do you think if there is a God, we have to do this matrix, right? We have to say God exists, God doesn't exist. Stephen behaves like he's religious, Stephen doesn't behave like he's religious, right? So right now you're in one of those quadrants. You're not sure God exists. So you're behaving maybe as if he doesn't exist. I'm asking you, and now he could exist or he could not exist. So imagine you move into another quadrant. You say, I'm going to behave like I'm Hindu, or come down to my temple in San Diego, whatever. You're going to behave in some religion. Do you think if God exists, he's going to say, "Oh God, Stephen, you picked the wrong one. It's Jainism. It's whatever. It's Latter-day Saint." I don't think. I think a revolutionary statement. I think God has common sense. If he exists. If he doesn't exist, it doesn't matter what you do, right? But if God exists, he must have common sense, meaning that if you make an earnest attempt to understand, or at least engage yourself religiously, not believe and force yourself to believe, not make excuses for evil that happens in the world or cancer for kids. But if you behave in a certain way, I don't think if God exists, big if, you'll be judged harshly.
This is exactly the conclusion that stopped me being religious when I was 18.
Really?
Yeah, it's the exact conclusion.
Say more about that.
So we would go to church every week. We grew up going to church, read the Bible, all of those things. And then when I was younger, I was operating under this assumption that I was going to go to hell and burn if I didn't obey this person in the sky. Then I read these books, Richard Dawkins' books, and a bunch of other books on the subject matter. And I heard that God was omnipotent and omniscient, which makes a lot of sense, because if you create this world and you can, you're active in it, you must be pretty powerful and pretty knowing. And then I concluded that I basically concluded God would have common sense. And I thought he would understand that I'm struggling. And he would understand that as long as I live a good life and I'm not murdering people and I'm not mean to people and I'm kind and I'm respectful to people and I'm a net positive on the earth, then if heaven does exist, any God that I would want to support anyway would let me in. And he would understand that I didn't have enough information to put my flag in any particular religion. So he would let me in. So my thesis then became, well, just be a good person. And you're kind of hedging your bets, because any decent God that's, I think, worth supporting would go, that was a decent person. He couldn't quite see it, whatever. But
you wouldn't see it a little different. I'm sorry to push back. But,
no,
but
good,
if you, let's say I want to get in shape, Stephen, and I deserve it. Got kids, I want to be healthy, live a long life. But you see me eating, I wouldn't eat cheeseburgers, kosher, but hamburgers, French fries, just. I'm saying, well, whatever we'll understand. In other words, you you would agree that if you knew God exists, you'd behave very radically differently, right? If you had an encounter with God,
Well,
Jesus or God himself, right?
it depends. If I knew for sure that he existed and a particular book and doctrine was correct, I would 100% behave in line with that book and doctrine. But if I knew he existed, but I didn't know which book was correct, then I probably would behave exactly how I do now.
So, but what
Because
if
the
all
behavior, the practice, the Sabbath comes from one of those books or doctrines. So
right, but even if you couldn't choose, right? What if it's like what if it's possible that all of them are right and all of them are wrong? In other words, we are so frail, fragile, and inadequate to the task of understanding what the true nature of God is, that he made it such that, again, I'm not saying this is true, but it made it possible that there would be ways of interpretation for how he existed, right? Like, I, as a Jew, don't believe in Jesus's divinity, right? But I don't fault my friends, Jay Bhattacharya. I don't fault him. I don't. In fact, I think it's beautiful that that's his avenue for worship. He believes that Jesus died for his personal sins. Now, you would admit that you would have Jesus will still die for your sin, or he did die for your sins if you're an axe murderer. So I just think that level of saying it's as long as I don't murder anybody, it's like me saying, well, if I'm destined to get into shape, I'll get into shape. My metabolism will work it out without me taking the serious action and working hard, because you do it in the rest of your life, right? And I'm not, by the way, I'm not proselytizing. It's actually forbidden in my religion. I'm not proselytizing, but that concept of God is that Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in. I also don't believe in that. Like, he's omniscient. He's going to prevent babies from dying from cancer. Or he's going to do this or that. Like, that's why they make fun of it, or they relegate it to a friend in the sky. You called it, right? I don't believe there's a friend in the sky. I don't think that even makes sense. But I believe that we are seeing something so heavily refracted. Again, if it exists. It's like showing a microwave telescope, showing Bicep or the Simons Observatory to, Gog, who lived in a cave 200,000 years ago. Like, there's no way to get from there to here. But that doesn't mean like there isn't an ultimate there and an ultimate here. For me, I let me just say the final thing I want to say, because I don't want to make too much about this, but there's a value in practicing, even if you don't believe. Just like I say sometimes, like, even if you got divorced, like, you should still get married. Because it changes you and it opens you up to the full panoply of human experience that a lot of people don't get to experience. And when people have the capacity, the capability to do it, they should, in my opinion. By the way, I'm not advocating to get divorced either. But the point being, you obviously wrestle with it. And interestingly enough, the word Israel, which is the central country of Judaic faith, means fight with God. It means wrestle with God. El is God. Israel means fight. So how do you wrestle with it? Do you wrestle with it? Do you think about it? Or do you say, I'm not going to read these books that I read before I was 18 because it seems so childish to me now? And so
I do. I certainly wrestle with it. So when I say wrestle with it, not in a way that is causing me any pain or agony or deep frustration, but it's kind of, it's a recurring thought. And I actually think from doing this podcast and just maybe growing up and the journey I've been on, I have more questions now than I ever have since I became agnostic at 18. So I have more questions now. It's funny, I've been on this bit of an arc where I was certain when I was younger that God was real. And then I was really certain that the God I believed in probably wasn't real. And now I've kind of found myself going back to a position where I'm like, almost like I'm starting the research project again to figure out what actually is real. I sometimes wonder if I'm looking for the wrong thing, because I think because we've been so sort of indoctrinated into this idea that it is a man in the sky and all these the white beard and stuff. So we're like looking for evidence of that, but maybe I should be searching for evidence of something else. Maybe is it like a feeling I'm searching for? Is it?
It's interesting that you said that. It reminds me of Einstein. Einstein said he never asked his father, "What would happen, Daddy, if I was traveling at the speed of light and I looked at myself in a mirror?" And he said, it was good I didn't ask those questions when I was 5, because my dad would have given me the standard answer of the 1800s, which was, you see your reflection or whatever. And then Einstein said, I would have just accepted that. And then I would never have gone on to create the theory of relativity. What you said echoes what he said. Because if you had asked these questions and just accepted the belief that you had when you were 12, you would not be approaching them with the maturity of a Stephen Bartlett at age 32. right? And now you have this perspective. You have a wisdom that you've accrued from your life experiences, from the millions of people that you've helped around the world to expose them to different things. And you're on a journey yourself. So anyway, I don't have tolerance for scientists that dismiss it and say it's stupid. And I'm like, but I also, I find that religious people are too comfortable with saying everything is described by God. Everything happens because of God. And I see this a lot with religious children. Sometimes I'll go into kids' school and teach them, about science. I'll bring these, props and stuff. But when I talk to them, sometimes I'll say like, "Oh, look, there's a rainbow over there. Oh, that's great. Where did it come from?" And they'll say, "God made it." I think that's, I joke, that's a form of child abuse. If you just say that God made it, you're A, completely ignorant about the science, but B, you're also diminishing God's power, right? If you say, no, actually that's an effect of water droplets, which are formed of hydrogen and oxygen, and here's their chemistry, and here's how they form a different state of matter when they're in collective, and here's how that causes light to diffract at different wavelengths, and here's wavelength electromagnetic radiation. Where does that come from? And you keep asking the question, why? Only when you get to the question, the answer, the final answer, I don't know. That's the only time I would say, okay, God could come in there. But that takes you back. That whole chain of refraction, of light, of dielectric material, of wavelengths, of color, all that stuff, that takes you back till almost to the Big Bang, which then intersects with what I do.
You said that you think of God as almost like a force. Do you think it's a conscious force? If I sit down and pray to this God, will they hear me?
I honestly could say I don't know, but I know that you'll change. I know that you'll hear yourself.
Okay.
If you can go down to the ocean, Steve, if you can go down to the Pacific Ocean and just be isolated and just pour yourself out for an hour, I guarantee it will change your life. You will be in tears, but no one will see you. And that's the thing. That's why you have to be alone. You cannot do it with any other person. You must do it on your own, because there's no Sam Harris meditation waking up app. It's not going to do the same for you as just you alone. And not knowing is part of the point, I think.
But what's that got to do with God? What's me going down to the beach and pouring my heart out, which would get me into my amygdala? It'll get me thinking about, it'll make me emotional. I can imagine, even listening to certain music can make you feel that. What role is God playing in that moment?
Because if God exists, I do believe that he's inside of you and that you can connect with him. Again, you can't detect him with an MRI machine, or you can't detect him with a laser. But, again, it's a big if. I'm not guaranteeing, I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm not that kind of doctor. I can't give you a prescription that'll make you believe, but to have access to it, you have to be open to a communication, right? Imagine you got, an email and you just never respond to it. Like people, remember the movie Interstellar? Have you seen that movie? So, the people on Earth are communicating with the people on, Matthew McConaughey's daughter, and she doesn't know if he's listening, and he doesn't, and he knows that but in that sense, he's kind of like this guy, like he has knowledge that she doesn't have. But if she doesn't try, maybe she wouldn't, maybe just the aspect of trying, the attribute of trying is what opened her up to that return signal, the communication that she eventually received.
So interesting, because when I asked the question about, can God hear me? And if he can hear me, I guess the second question is, can he do anything about what he's hearing?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much evidence in the world that he can't hear you and he's not going to do anything about it.
But again, you say that, but like, what if, who knows? If your parents, like there were a lot of the stories in the early Old Testament are about sterile, barren women that couldn't conceive, from Sarah, Rebecca to Rachel. All these women, they couldn't conceive. They cried out. They prayed. And again, women are closer to God in many ways because they contain life within them. Again, in what sense are you not already the recipient of the beneficence of something that we just don't understand? Like
potentially, yeah. But when I asked this question about if I pray, is it going to influence my outcomes in any way? There's a natural
I don't believe
disaster.
it does. I don't believe it does for the reason I said before. Like people were praying here for the Dodgers. I'm sure there were equally virtuous people praying for the Yankees.
That's what I mean. If you think about the scientific method,
that's why I said I don't.
We could apply that and say, does prayer work?
Right.
And you could get, I don't know, look through history at the Holocaust or look at some other natural disaster and think, has praying swayed the probabilities of bad things happening to these people?
So I don't believe that at all, but I do believe that fundamentally a person who believes that their actions have some impact will feel at least a sense of gratitude. Let me give you an example. You're familiar in Christianity, people say a blessing before the meal, like grace before a meal. So in Judaism, you do that before the meal, after the meal, sometimes during the meal. But the point is, the more you express gratitude, you cannot be a happy person and be an ingrate.
Yeah.
The more you're grateful for, like the sound of a song that is just so meaningful to you, the sight of a painting or a sunset, the more that and in Judaism we say blessings for those things. Like we say, if we see a meteor shower, we say a blessing. It's hard for me as an astronomer, you got to say bless. A rainbow, another thing. Those are like kind of things we become desensitized to in life, and we just take for granted. When you taste a fine wine, or you taste some delicious food, again, it could just be chlorophyll. Here, Stephen, here's your plate of agar gum. Like, okay, great, I could live. Here's whey powder. That's all you ever get to eat. And you'd be like, this sucks. I know what I had. And if I could only go back to it after I get out, of the situation, I'm going to be so grateful. To me, that gratitude connects to the ultimate source of that provided, that we can't understand. It's true. I cannot give you, and I told you, I have problems with prayer because I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like to be told I have to say this in this order, stand up, sit down, fast on this day, do this thing, not eat that delicious pink guy with the curly tail. But when you do that, this, the more you're disciplined, the happier your life is. Who's more happy? The guy who eats everything he wants, or Jocko, like the person who just gives into all their temptations of alcohol, the person who abstains and elevates what they do. And I think we want to elevate ourselves above the level of the animals.
But I can have all those behaviors of like a gratitude practice. I can have a meditation practice. I go down to the beach. I can do all of those things. And I can still do all of those things without the need of a God.
Oh, sure.
And I'll get all the benefits of those things. I'd get when I express gratitude before I eat, or sometimes when I'm getting on a plane and I touch the plane to remind myself, and I can almost make myself emotional just thinking about how remarkable it is that I get to do some of the things I've been able to do in my life, to the point of like physical emotion.
Yeah.
But without the presence of needing to equate that to a God in any way. So I'm trying to find. I guess I'm searching for where God fits in all of this. Why is a God required? Is it just because I have so many blessings that I should be thankful to someone for these things? Which I do contend with. Okay, and if you think about how my life has changed in the last 10 years of, from going from someone who was shoplifting pizzas to sitting here and getting to do these, it's remarkable. You start to think you're a little bit in the Truman Show if you think about it too deeply. But and you do feel, you think, who do I thank for this? So you think, do I thank my parents? Like,
right.
Do I thank myself? Do I thank a God? But is that the reason? It just to be thankful? But then I go, there's a bias there because there's kids in the town in Botswana that I was born in that are still in the town in Botswana that I was born in, and they're not doing so good. So did God not like them? And then if you go, no, God likes both of you, then I go, okay, well then God isn't responsible for this. It was something that I did or my parents did that are responsible for this, so I should thank them. So where does God fit again? And I just go around in these loops and I go, I don't know, are we trying to create a God to make sense of the things we feel and the experiences we have, and the baby that grabs our finger, and the gratitude, and the solar eclipse, and the sunset? Are we trying to give that to someone because it's just so, the awe is just so much? Or did God give that to us?
Well, I mean, it's the perspective that you're bringing is obviously you've thought about this a lot, and obviously your attitude is healthy, and I think you have, on balance, I think, obviously living as a good life, even if I'd never say that an atheist can't be a good person or can't be happy or any of these things. The question is, where does it augment and affect your life? Like, for example, I don't know if I would give 10% of my income to charity, before tax income to charity, if it wasn't a commandment in my religion. But I don't feel shame for that. I don't feel like, oh, you needed religion to tell you this. Because again, I'm still searching just as much as I think that you are. I don't feel like as untroubled by the answers of it, right? I don't feel like that not knowing for sure that God exists, which I don't believe is possible anyway, that should be an impediment to me practicing giving charity, being in a community, raising my kids with an appreciation of their history and their culture, and just the contributions of their religion, of your religion, whatever, to the world.
So if you found out from this new project that you've launched, this $200 million project that you've launched to figure out the existence of, I guess, where not the existence, but the origin of the universe, the origin of life, if you found out unequivocally that God isn't real, convinces you to the point that you now believe that God is not the creator of the universe, and that, I don't know, you figure out some other way we can create universes in little labs, maybe 1,000 years from now, we can create our own little universes from nothing somehow.
Or we find out we're in a
Or
simulation.
something else.
Right.
Yeah, whatever. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. How does that change you?
Because I'm a behaviorist, I really don't feel like my life would be better to act as if God doesn't exist. In other words, if I know God doesn't exist, then I'm going to act like he doesn't exist, right? That's a logical assumption.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to stop giving charity. Like, is that going to make me happier in life? Is that going to benefit society or or Zeus or whatever doesn't exist? Like, I already know that's not true, right? So I've kind of done this experiment. Like all these other gods, I know I don't believe in. Ra, Akhenaten.
So you wouldn't do anything differently?
Benefits to my life are so substantive that I would not change my behavior.
But you're being guided then by your behavior and the rewards from behavior, which is pretty much my life.
Yeah, well, okay, so right, the breath work and the meditation.
No, I'm being guided by, like, if gratitude feels good, I do it. If going down to the beach feels good, I do it. If having a baby feels good, I'll do it. So like,
it could be dangerous to devolve into
so if you
hedonism.
add God to my life or take it away, my behaviors are going to be the same because I'm being guided by the things that are making me feel good.
But I don't think so. You're not like these hedonistic Instagram influencers.
No, because that would make me feel good. Like a donut, I've run the experiment, and eating the donut makes me feel okay for the time it's touching my tongue, but then bad for 12 hours when my gut starts reacting badly. So I don't do that anymore.
Well, let me ask you this question. So if they found out that working out is eventually, it's actually going to shorten your life, or it's going to do the opposite of what you're intending it to do necessarily, would you keep working out?
How much is it going to shorten my life by?
Every ab crunch you do, every bench press takes an hour off your life or something, or a couple minutes off your life.
Ooh, it's an interesting one. I would probably live 10 years less to live like 10 years better, like to have a better health span. So if you told me I was going to live to 100 without working out, or I could live to 90, but I'm going to be strong and fit for those 90 years, I'll take the 90 years.
So in my analogy, that's exactly right. So I feel like that level of perfecting or enjoyment and the ancillary benefits of gratitude and happiness that I've received tangibly, you cannot convince me, as I can't convince you that working out I couldn't convince you working out is bad. It feels bad for you. It does something to you physically, mentally, emotionally. I won't say spiritually, but for me to see the benefits, to see the things that I've seen, look, Stephen, I've buried my father, okay? And in Judaism, one of the core tenets is that it's sort of the highest mitzvah, it's the highest commandment to take care of someone who's died. Why? Because they can't reciprocate. Most of what we do in life, we have some kind of contract, we play by the rules, we did things nicely, we have contractors, we invest in Dragon's Den, whatever. We're going to get there's nothing good. There's nothing that will come out of it that will benefit you. I've seen things, I've seen people that are saints that I can't aspire to even be in their presence of, but it's made my life better. I wouldn't change the things that I've done or seen. And you couldn't convince me it wasn't good for me. And as I said before, maybe you think I'm weak, but I wouldn't have done it if I didn't feel it was commanded to me.
You mentioned the word simulation a second ago. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about. What is, just for people that don't know, what is the simulation theory, and are we living in a simulation?
Great question. So the simulation theory was really conjectured by a British philosopher, or he's actually Swedish, or I believe Nick Bostrom. He conjectured the following. He said, compute is getting so phenomenally powerful in just our recent time horizon. So the notion that Nick and others had proposed is that if this is extrapolated indefinitely into the future, whether or not that can happen is a question about planetary resources, part of the reason Elon wants to go to Mars, and I do want to talk to you about Mars in a bit, and that extrapolation leads inexorably to the conclusion that compute will be effectively free and it'll be infinite. It'll be completely democratized. It will be completely demonetized. It will be almost, as I said, too cheap to measure the expense of computing, and it'll be everywhere in just a short amount of time. I mean, remember the phone that we have, the iPad that you're using. These things would literally be a mythological witchcraft, 80 years ago, and now they're commonplace. And so the notion that Bostrom proposed, is that trend continues into the future, that basically the capability of those computers would be to be able to model entire planets, entire ecosystems, even cultures, communities, maybe even people themselves. So let's take a parallel detour for just a bit. You're not seeing me necessarily. You're seeing photons are coming into your retinas, right? Photons are packets of energy, form of light. They travel at the speed of light. They have different wavelengths. The wavelengths we call color. They're going into your cornea, getting bent a little bit. Then they're going to your lens, getting bent more. Then they're going to your retina, and they're getting detected on this, basically a detector, just like a sensor in a camera, which has pixels, except it has trillions of pixels instead of millions of megapixels, or a few megapixels. And those are being transduced. The color gets transduced on cells that are called cone cells. The intensity is rod cells. And those are getting transduced into electrical impulses that go from the optic nerve right into your brain. And remember, Andrew Huberman told you on the show, the retina is the only part of the human brain that's outside of the cranium. It's outside of the skull. And so it's a part of your brain that's outside. So it transduces it, makes electrical impulses. Those electrical impulses then get conducted like wires conducting electricity. And then those go into your brain, and synapses in your brain and the neural pathways in your brain can reproduce those. Now, you have an Apple Vision Pro, I think I saw you with once. So that can kind of simulate. It could make very accurate representation of me, holographic perhaps, and you would want to reach out and touch me. Now imagine instead of just the physical electronics of a headset Apple Vision Pro, you just inject the electrical signals into the brain. So that's plausible. It's just purely physical material processes. Photons converted to electrons, get converted to neuron signals, get processed in the brain. And so all you have to do is get that sensory inputs in. You could have a digital retina, a fake retina, and you just stimulate it, goes into your brain. They're working on that. Same with sound. Sound is even easier. You put a little speaker in your ear and you'd hear it. So the notion is that we could physically just be disconnected brains in a vat, right? We could just be in this vast system, just bunches of brains. Don't ask how they got there, but we're all just receiving stimuli, and we're just being fed. I'm being fed an image of you over there. You're being fed an image of me over here. I don't know why. Nobody knows why this would occur, but the computing power is there. If you think that the Apple Vision Pro, if you were alive in 1971, you could not have necessarily predicted the Apple Vision Pro. It was too far advanced from what we have, right, from what we had at that point in time. But imagine it just keeps increasing at any rate you like. Eventually there'll be a point where every bit of information, every atom in the universe, every photon in the universe could theoretically be simulated. Again, I don't know why this is, but it would be indistinguishable from our reality, according to people like Nick Bostrom and others that suggest this is so that our existence is, we are essentially in a simulation. So the notion is that we're all these characters in this literal simulation run on some computing device, some hardware device that we don't necessarily understand at this point.
And we're calling that God.
Well, that was what I was going to get to. So eventually you get to a point where if you could simulate everything, then you would have to ask, there must be some simulator, right? There must be some master simulator. So let's say I'm a simulation. Well, who simulated me? And then, who simulated them? And then who simulated them? So that's the recursion, that's infinite regress. Mm-hmm. You can't actually get to a base level of, a final simulator. And if you did, it would kind of be like God. Like you're talking about this brain in a jar that's created out of silicon and oxygen and whatever we're made of, but it's physically created by human beings. What if you can't pay the power bill that week and, you have to choose between unplugging your refrigerator or unplugging the brain? Like, is that killing something? It starts to enter into the realm of ethics and maybe even these concepts of a deity. What I've heard, and I find quite plausible, is remember I said the implication of having infinite computing is that you can simulate everything in the universe.
Yeah.
But can it simulate itself? So I want to digress into what's called complexity theory. There are two different types of difficult things. There's like a complex thing, like building an Airbus 320. It's very complicated, right? You can do it if I give you all the parts, all the instructions, give you the right order, and I keep you energized. If like anybody can follow those instructions and make it. The Earth's weather pattern state right now is complex. There's no way that you can actually create that. Like you would need another planet-sized thing to create that. That's called irreducibly complex. You cannot make it simpler and then build it up from simpler and simpler things. Unlike an Airbus, you can build it up from smaller and smaller parts. And as long as you follow the recipe, if you follow the recipe for the Simons Observatory, you'll get the Simons Observatory. But if you try to simulate, and it may be that simulate the weather, you do need another planet. Like we need another planet, just like the Earth, and then we'd introduce carbon dioxide at a certain rate, and we'd see, is it really going to cause it? But like that's totally impractical, right? So the question of these things is it really a simulation if it's not 100%? Like you could make a very, very good weather simulation. We do have that. But famously, they're only accurate for a few days, right? So how do you build up, an accurate simulator? It'd have to be the same. So in other words, do we need is there another universe where the simulators are that's equally complex to the simulation creation that they made? And then did they stop, are they made of silica? Are they artificial? So there are proposals that you could detect the presence. It's kind of like you mentioned the Truman Show, how all computers work right now is on this binary code, zeros and ones, 5 volts, 0 volts. And that means that the world is fundamentally discretized. It's broken into little chunks, like the screen on your computer or your iPad. It's pixelated. In space, it would be called voxels, volume elements. And so you can have a large number of them, but it's a big difference between a large number and infinity. To really have a continuous, temperature is continuous, like go from 0 degrees to 100 degrees, and there's every step in between. But in the simulated world, because you need an infinite number of computer power to simulate just from 0 degrees to 1 degree, not let alone from 0 to 100 or every possible combination. So at some level, you'd see, if you zoomed in really close on the thermometer, you'd see there's a little jump. So you could detect the presence of the simulator. It's more complicated. Actually, it's done using astrophysical sources called gamma ray bursts and other things that have properties that are seemingly incompatible with there being a simulation at the most distant and therefore earliest moments in the universe. So right now, there's zero evidence for it. Nick Bostrom will tell you, and you should have him on, that's basically a cop out, and there are ways around that fail-safe mechanism.
Aliens. Do aliens exist?
Yes, aliens do exist. There's an old joke. They're called Hungarians. There's so many countries. Yes, there's an old joke. There are aliens, they're Klingons, and they're around Uranus. But I wanted to give this to you, Stephen, as one of the gifts I brought for you today. This is some soap for you. This is soap.
Uranus soap.
It's Uranus soap. So you want to keep Uranus clean.
Thank you so much.
In all seriousness, there's no evidence for aliens. There's what I call possibility does not equal probability. The existence of so many stars in the universe means there's so many planets, which is true. We found almost every single star has maybe 10 planets around it, and we have 100 billion in our galaxy alone. There's 100 billion galaxies in our universe. We're talking one with 24 zeros after it. That's how many planets there are in the observable universe.
Planets.
Planets. People say that means it's got to be life in the universe. No, it doesn't mean anything. There could be so many hurdles for life to get started, let alone to create complex technology producing life like us, that we're it. And I'm not saying we are it, but I'm saying there's been 0.000% evidence that life exists beyond the Earth. I know you've had Lou Elizondo on. The claims that he's making are controversial. They're not scientific. They're government. I'm not dismissing his experiences with people he talks about. They're not persuasive. They're not addressing fundamental characteristics. The universe is vaster than you or I can comprehend. If this was our solar system, the nearest star would be like near in San Diego. There's almost no way for us to comprehend how enormous our universe is, let alone how vast the cosmos is.
How much of it can we see?
Technically we can see a lot of the universe, but most of that is way before even molecules formed. In other words, there's no possibility of life. Let's restrict ourselves to the Milky Way galaxy, which is the only galaxy we'll ever be able to explore, et cetera, at least unless we invent wormhole travel like interstellar. But for now, we have sent probes. The farthest probe we've ever sent was launched in 1977. It's 1 light day away from the Earth. Okay? So that means traveling at the speed of light, the fastest speed possible.
Which is how much miles an hour?
186,000 miles per second, 300,000 kilometers per second. It's only, quote unquote, it's only gotten 1 light day away. The nearest star is 1,200 times farther away than that. It's 4 light years away. So it'll never get to that other star. I mean, it took 50 years to get 1 light day. So it need 1,200 times 50 years, call it 100. So you're talking like vast numbers of millennia to get to the nearest star. And that star, we don't even know if it has life on it or not. And it's not actually going to that star. But the point is, the galaxy itself is so large. And the types of environments in which life can take hold are so precarious. It's actually, we tell ourselves a story, like you said, with molecules, and then they start to evolve, and then they get, it's really not known how life got created. It's not known how life came from non-living material, from hydrogen, helium, oxygen, how that turned into a cell. It's a vast challenge in what's called synthetic organic chemistry and the formation, origin of life. And then to say that those entities then evolved into some kind of technologically produced. If we found a dinosaur on Mars, that would be the discovery of the history of the planet of all time, right? Or whatever, even a bacterium on Mars. That would be an incredible discovery. So some people try to defeat this notion and say, well, life didn't have to necessarily get started in all these planets. It could have started once and then get brought to those other planets through meteorites.
Yeah.
This theory was created by the same Fred Hoyle who came up with the Big Bang Theory. They called it panspermia. It sounds dirty, but it's not. So these meteorites could carry genetic material and they could land on another planet. They could have landed on Earth. That's one theory, that life on Earth originated from another planet that had life on it. And in fact, this is one of your lovely parting gifts. This is what Elon will kill for. I'm going to give you something that Elon doesn't have. This is a piece of Mars. This is a real piece of Mars. It's 1.524 grams of another planet. I want you to touch it. You can see it's a little bit reddish, like the planet Mars.
This is much better than the butt soap you gave me.
I gave you a piece of Uranus and a piece of Mars. Here's some information about it. I give out, as I said, these meteorites on my website, briankeating.com, to lucky winners each month. And I'll give out the information. This was found in Africa. And how did it get here? Well, a meteorite hit the planet Mars, shattered off debris. That debris orbited around Mars for millions of years, perhaps. Eventually, it plowed into the Earth and landed in Africa. They found it. They said they knew it came from space. They analyzed it. It has the same chemical composition, molecular structure as the landers that are on Mars right now measure for Mars. So we know 100% that's from Mars. It's incredible. So Elon is desperately trying to get there. That's your little piece. Please
thank you.
Keep it safe. And that's one way that life could have gotten to Mars from the Earth, right? The same thing happens on the Earth as happened to Mars. So it could have hit Earth, blasted off some amoebas, some orcas, some kangaroo, whatever, and whatever was on the Earth at the time, and then eventually landed on Mars with the DNA of it, but it didn't take hold, right? So planets exchange DNA. It is possible, but we don't see life on Mars.
If we think about this table, to put in context how big the universe is, if the universe was the size of this table, how big would Earth be on this table?
Incomprehensibly small.
Not even a grain of sand?
No, far smaller.
Not even a fraction.
Even in our galaxy, it wouldn't be a grain of sand. Even if this were our galaxy, it wouldn't be a grain of sand. No. Our whole solar system would be perhaps, yes, 1 grain of sand. If this were a Milky Way galaxy, which is 100,000 light years across, it would be like 1 tiny little grain of sand.
What would be?
Of the solar system, out to the planet Neptune.
So what's that, 10 planets or something?
Well, we have there's 8 planets in our solar system, including the Earth. It used to be 9, but Pluto's no longer a planet. And we're about 1/3 of the way from the edge of the disk of the Milky Way. So traveling all across there, yes, we would be perhaps the entire solar system, actually smaller than maybe half a grain of sand.
And can we travel to the end of the solar system?
Well, we sent this object, it's gone
Yeah.
well beyond it. So the edge of the solar system is about 4 light hours. So in 50 years, Stephen, we've only gone, quote unquote, and I'm not denigrating, this is a historic accomplishment. We actually put on these spacecraft digitized pictures of human life, of voices, of songs from every continent, of culture, of recipes, of laughter of children, crying of babies. They put this called the golden disc. Carl Sagan was responsible for this. And they mounted it to it, and it's now, well, as I said, 24 light hours away. And the farthest edge of our solar system, the planet Neptune, is 4 light hours. Sorry, 24 light hours is the Voyager spacecraft. So we've only gone 1/6 of that. We've gone only 6 times the diameter of our solar system.
So our entire solar system would be a grain of sand on this table.
Less even, yeah, about half a grain, yeah.
Half a grain of sand on this table. This table's about 2.5 meters, roughly big.
Mm-hmm.
And how many tables are there?
That's a very good question. We think at least 100 billion tables, each one with 100 billion grains of sand. There are more stars in the entire universe that we can observe than every grain of sand on every beach, on every continent on our planet.
That's really wobbled in my head. So our entire solar system is half of grain of sand on this sort of 2-3 meter table, and there are 100 billion tables. So when you hear that, you go, okay, we really don't matter. Like it's so bizarre that we've fallen into the trap of believing that we're like important in any way. And then that, for me, that even throws another question mark towards religion. But the other thing it makes me go is, surely there's got to be some other life on one of these grains of sand on the 100 billion tables.
Again, well, let me just address the first thing. So you're about 10, maybe 15 trillion times bigger than a virus or a bacteria. Can that bacteria affect you or a virus hurt you? Of course it can. So size doesn't really make that big a difference in this context, right? Jupiter is 100 times bigger in diameter than the Earth. Does it make it more important? I think the Earth is much more important. I like the Earth a lot better. The Sun is 100 times bigger than Jupiter. Like, would you like to live there? So the point I'm trying to make is size isn't really that important. Numbers not really that important. And remember, don't ever forget, we're the only conscious, entity that we know about in the universe, right? There's literally like 70 different types of primates, right? Like monkeys you talked about before, bonobos, orangutan. None of them have what we have. None of them can have this.
Probabilistically.
Let me give you an example. I've been to Antarctica twice for bicep experiments. When I go there, Antarctica is the 7th continent to be discovered on Earth. It's approximately 12% of the landmass of the Earth. It's a huge, enormous continent with extreme mountains, weather, extreme cold. But the one thing it doesn't have is much life. But if you did that same thing, I said, look, Stephen, there's this continent. You could hardly walk across it in 5 or 6 years, even if you're a great athlete. People do it, but it would be very challenging to do it. It's enormous. It's got all the support for life. It's got hydrocarbons. It's got heat. It's got rocks. You can build shelter. You can have water, which is the most important thing. How much life do you think is there? Let me just tell you, Stephen. It makes up 13% of the Earth's surface. There's 8 billion people on Earth. How many people do you think live there? I mean, as a scientist, you don't have to be a scientist. Say, I think there's probably, maybe 800 million people there. There's 0 people there, basically. So just the probability, I'm not saying it's impossible. Probability is not determined by possibility.
Because the thing with the South Pole is, okay, so there's no one there. And if you put me there and said, is there life? And I got a telescope out and I looked around, I'd go, there's no life here. I can't see anything.
Right.
I'd say I'm the only person here. And then I'd opposit meaning to myself. I'd say I must be really important. I might think that I'm a god if I'm the only life there. I'd look around for miles and I'd walk for days and days and days and send out pigeons and whatever. And I go, there's no one, it's just me. But then little do I know that although this little space is inhabitable, if you get on a plane and go a little bit further, you get to the land of the free.
Right. But what if we can't do that? What if there's no plane? What if there's nothing? What if this is all we have? I think that a lot of the sightings and stuff, I've interviewed the top fighter pilots, in the world that claim to have witnessed these encounters. I've, interviewed the top, people that claim these things exist. I've interviewed Avi Loeb, who's a good friend at Harvard, who runs a project. He claims he's discovered material from interstellar, technology, perhaps like a garbage barge that was floating throughout. He's a very eminent scientist. At no point do I ever understand the fundamental answer to the question, how did they get here? What properties, what physics properties do they use? They always say, oh, well, they defy the laws of physics. Well, I'm a physicist. I can understand some of the most deep physics you want. And by the way, there are many times in history where if I showed you something that was made by the US government, you would say that is witchcraft, magic.
Like the iPad thing, you said.
iPad is just one thing.
50 years ago.
That in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, by the way, I have to tell you this, if you don't know, the word podcast, do you know that comes from the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey?
Oh yeah, I read the article for it. It was a good
Yeah, it was an engineer at who called it an iPod, and the iPod came from the pod in 2001. So we owe podcast to 2001. So in that movie, there are iPads. There are guys communicating with iPad, but they thought it was like technology of like 20 centuries from now. No, I'm talking about the technology it would take to make traversable distances out of this incomprehensible cosmos that I talked about.
When you apply that thinking to God, it changes though, because earlier you said we just can't fathom.
Mm-hmm.
We can't fathom this creator and the factors that would go into this creator. So we almost have to, some people just choose to believe.
Right. Yeah.
And the same can be applied to this thinking of how they got here. It's like, listen, maybe we don't know their technology because it's just unfathomable. Like the iPod or the iPad was 100 years ago.
You're absolutely right.
So if they're just 100 years ahead of us technologically, we would think that they were doing witchcraft. We wouldn't understand the basis of the technology that they used to travel here.
Sure. But people like Lou will talk about things that are exactly scientific claims. One of the things in his book, which I read, he hasn't come on my podcast. I'd like to talk to him. But he talks about these craft and the properties of them, and how when you're inside of them, they're bigger than they are when you're outside of them, and how they affect and they interact with human biology and cause burns and so forth. And the technology he's talking about, it's not like some fifth force that I don't know about. It's using the properties of general relativity, of space-time. We do know enough about these things. Whereas God, you're right. I'm not being so critical maybe when it comes to this notion of God. But remember, I said I don't have to say I believe in gravity or in string theory or whatever. We can have evidence for it. So when they make claims that have to do with physics, they should be tested by the laws of physics. When you talk about God, I'm stipulating you can't test those with laws, and therefore I can't prove God exists, despite how much I would like to or not like to.
So what do you think the probability is that we are alone? Do you think we're alone in the universe?
I think it's very high.
You think it's high?
I think it's very high that we're alone. Let me make an analogy. For us to be here, Earth had to have the following circumstances happen. We had to have, can you pass me the moon?
The moon?
Yeah. And actually, can you pass there's a globe behind you. Love to have that. Perfect. Okay. So I put here a globe, and I put here the moon, and these are almost an exact ratio of size. This is about how big the moon is compared to the Earth. Now, originally, before the moon didn't exist, when the Earth was first formed, the Earth condensed out of a giant version of trillions and trillions and trillions of tons of these meteoritic materials. They sank to the bottom, made the core of the Earth. The Earth's core is made of iron. Heavier, lighter elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, they kind of accreted onto it. And eventually, this super planet formed. And that planet, the early Earth, was called Theia. And it's called that because eventually there was a planet the size of that. Give me that beach ball, please, Steve. A planet about this size, maybe a little bit smaller.
Just for people that aren't watching.
Yeah, so there's a beach ball that's a little bit smaller than the globe that we're looking at. It impacted this early Earth, Theia, blasted out material into the solar system. And over millions and millions of years, some of that material condensed and formed the moon. The moon and then the Earth formed as we know it today. Now the moon is 250,000 miles away from the Earth, It's exactly at the right place and size that we have tides on the Earth. We have ocean tides 4 times a day. So right now I'm showing where high tide would be, say, where this part of the moon's gravity is pulling on the ocean here, so it rises it up. That means that some of the tides on the other side are also high tide, and then right angles, low tide, low tide.
Oh, so that's how the tides work. Basically, wherever the moon is, it's pulling the ocean up.
Yeah, it's actually pulling the Earth, and the Earth is surrounded by this sphere of water, and so that moves the Earth within that water, and the water gets turned into like a lozenge shape. So the high tides will be twice a day, and the low tides will be twice a day, right angles to them. So that happens, and we believe that that process is what was necessary to make the materials from the oceans where life started, and eventually get that on the land and fertilize and make people eventually. Okay, so remember, I'm trying to explain how we got here. So there had to be this enormous collision from a pre-existing object in our solar system to create the moon and the Earth as we know them now. But that wasn't enough. Then there had to be these giant icebergs called comets. Comets bombard the Earth over periods of millions of years. The comets brought the ocean-bearing material that brought water to the Earth's surface and minerals and so forth to the Earth's surface. Eventually, the Earth cooled down, and those oceans covered about 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean, as shown here. So that comet had to occur, that bombardment and the fertilization of water or providing of water, hydration of the Earth came courtesy of comets. Then lastly, for us to be here, these guys, these are dinosaurs. Here I brought an actual representation of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were roaming the Earth. We know that, right? 65 million years ago, an asteroid about this size, which is about an inch across, hit the Earth, traveling 250,000 miles per hour, something like that. Hit it near Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula right here. Created this enormous devastation, this crater that obliterated the atmosphere, filled the atmosphere with pollution and basically made like nuclear winter, like you and Annie talked about. And that cut off light to plants, and eventually the dinosaurs, most of the dinosaurs, almost all the dinosaurs died. Now, that allowed mammals, the first mammals were little tiny rodents, rats, right? And I believe all evolution is true, right? So those little rats then eventually evolved and made whales and people and bats and all sorts of cool stuff. And eventually we came from that. So I've described to you 3 very important bombardments of the Earth. 1, Earth's moon formed from a huge collision. 2, comets bombard the Earth, flooding it with water just the right amount, not too much, not too little, just perfect. And 3, a meteor kills off the dinosaurs. If any of those came in a different order, we would likely not be here. So not only did they occur, 3 incredibly improbable things that you would never predict would occur in that order, happened to occur, and they happened to occur in the right order.
The first 2 created life, though, right?
Say again?
It was the first 2 of those 3 that created life.
Allowed for life to exist. Yes, you're right.
The dinosaur
but remember, I'm trying to explain how DOAC occurs, right?
Oh, okay.
For us to be here, if there were dinosaurs here, if the dinosaurs had a space program, where they could zap away with a laser and they could deflect the asteroid, they would have done it, and we wouldn't be here, likely. Okay, so you're right, but let's say those events occurred in a different pattern. The small asteroid hit the Earth first, nothing happens, there's no dinosaurs to kill. Then the comets come in, flood the Earth with ocean, but then this huge, this Theia hits the Earth, forms into its moon. That would have boiled off all the ocean as well. So we wouldn't have any water there for life to exist on. And then the dinosaurs wouldn't even need to exist. So those are just 3 things, Stephen. By the way, we have also the planet Jupiter I talked about before. Galileo discovered its moons. Jupiter is like a bodyguard. It protects the Earth from almost every major deadly impact. The moon is also like a bodyguard. See all the craters on this moon that my son 3D printed? He's proud to show it to you.
Yeah.
These are death strikes that could have taken out the Earth. Look how big some of them are. They're as big as the Earth as the dinosaur-killing meteorite in some cases. So we have all these conditions. Now, I've only named 5 or 6. Imagine each one of the 5 or 6 only occurs with a probability of 1 in 10,000. 1 part in 10 to the 4th. Well, guess what happens? You take 1 in 10,000, multiply by 1 in 10,000, 1 in 10,000, 6 times. To say that, you get a number that's smaller than the number of planets in the universe. In other words, the probability of just those 6 things, I think there's trillions of things. How life formed, the cell formed, the chemistry, the biology, and then the culture, whatever. All those things that formed to make us technological, I think the probability is extremely small, which is why I said, I think the probability is low that there are other life forms, or another way to say it, I think it's very high that we are alone. And that might be for a reason. There might be some reason. Maybe we're meant to really take care of Earth. Maybe we're meant to really appreciate the blessings of what we have on Earth.
If you're an entrepreneur, you're probably going to want to listen to this. It's a message from one of our sponsors on this podcast, which is LinkedIn. If you've listened to me on this podcast for a while now, you'll know that I've been on a bit of an evolution as a business owner and entrepreneur. And one of those evolutions that has become clearer and clearer as I've matured is that the single most important thing in building a business, in building a company, is hiring. The definition of the word company is actually group of people. And that is the first responsibility and job that any entrepreneur has and should focus on. But surprisingly, most don't. About 80% of my team have been hired from LinkedIn. And I think there's very few platforms, if any, in the world that could give you that diversity of candidate with that much information and data on their profiles. It usually costs money, but for the entrepreneurs that are listening to me, I've got you a free job ad post for your company on LinkedIn. Just go to linkedin.com/DOAC to post your free job ad today. That's linkedin.com/DOAC. Terms and conditions apply. This is quite interesting. 85% of internet users have heard of VPNs, but only 55% know what they do. If you're in that group, let me explain. VPNs enable your location online to differ from where you actually are geographically to help you browse and stream sites that would otherwise be unavailable to you. I use NordVPN, who are a sponsor of this show, to watch Manchester United games online no matter where I am in the world. And Indy from my team uses them whenever she's booking flights back home to New Zealand. Having a different online location means she can take advantage of dynamic pricing and get cheaper prices for her flights. NordVPN is the fastest VPN in the world, and just one account can be used across 10 devices. And they've shared a generous offer for my listeners, a discount and 4 additional months free on a 2-year plan. It's also completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So head to nordvpn.com/DOAC or click the link in the description below. Star signs and horoscopes.
Yeah.
Is there any possibility, in your view, from everything you've done in your research and your studies of the universe, is there any possibility that anything up there in the stars is determining our outcomes and our personality and whether he's going to dump me or I'm going to do well on Bitcoin? Is there anything?
No, there's no evidence for it in the sense that you can do randomized controlled trials or double-blind surveys. You can do exact simulations. As I said, the theory that the position of Jupiter at the moment that you were born can literally be replicated. There's something like 1 million people born every day. And then at the exact same time, there's probably 14,000 or whatever. You could do the math and figure it out. For them all to have, for no person to ever have, sort of duplication of luck or circumstance, the effect in terms of physical forces, the gravity of Jupiter, the pull of the sun, the position of the Earth on the day you were born. Now, there are correlation effects, right? So you have to be careful not to confuse correlation with causation, right? So I'm actually born on the most frequent birthday on all the calendars, September 9th. Now, what is September? September 9th is about 9 months after the holiday season, right? So in Western culture, women are partying. Maybe my mom and my dad had a nice, New Year's Eve or Christmas party or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's led to me being here, right? So there are correlation. And then so that means that there's a lot of people that are Virgos born on September 9th, none of which are like me. Or in the Southern Hemisphere versus the Northern Hemisphere, a woman who has gestation during the summer might feel differently than if she's gestating during the winter, even though the babies are born at the same day, right? They're just born on opposite sides of the earth. So they will have very different personalities, whereas astrology says they should be the same.
It's interesting because people will, especially people that are precious about horoscopes and astrology and those kinds of things, will say, I have just as much evidence for my thing as you do for your thing. Like because they almost consider it to be a religious belief. These people that I know, literally, some people have designed their entire lives and the meaning of their life around meaning that they're finding out by looking up at the stars. How is it different from religion, astrology?
There are elements of religion. Yeah, certainly it came out of religion. I don't think people now worship, constellations, or I don't think there's many major religions that are based on astrological, contemplation. But
maybe without the worship part, but they're seeking guidance in their lives. They're getting answers from the stars. They're making decisions based on it. Much of their moral compass is being determined. Like much of their morals and ethics and decisions and behaviors are being determined by it in the same way that it's being determined by someone that believes in a God.
Yeah. I mean,
It's hard to,
I'm a wrong
why do
person to
people
ask in
need
some
this?
ways.
Why do people need this?
People need answers to contemplate the universe. First of all, it's a scary universe, right? We're confronted by things that none of us can understand the entirety of. No, the brightest Nobel Prize winners, the greatest scientists, the greatest thinkers, we can't really contemplate it. So we go through life, we try to make the best of it, but we also have this sense of self and this theory of self and the theory of mind that, we can relate to other people and we want answers. So and I think that is in common. I think you're right. Religion is I almost wish did you ever wish that you were more religious? I mean, I don't,
100%.
yeah, I wish I was too,
100%.
and I'm not. And hopefully my kids won't hear it. No, I heard from a psychologist once, he said, you should endeavor in your life that you pass on only half of your neuroses to your kids.
Neuroses.
Crazy anxieties, fears, weird pathologies, psychological deficiencies. Because if every parent did that, the species is going to get better and better. But if you keep making everyone as anxious, as nervous, and there's no progress in history, a lot of the zodiac religions that you talked about, or astrological religions, they view time as a circle. In other words, a flat circle. A spiral goes into the future. That's Western civilization. That's progress in science. That's forward moving to the stars, to wherever we're going to go, and more human knowledge and flourishing. But if you just say, I'm committed to, I'm going to be repeating every year on the birthday, I'm going to be repeating what all that my ancestors did, that's very depressing. And it doesn't lead to innovation, to find cures for diseases, to find explanations for fields and forces and technology that we have.
So what is the meaning of life?
Glad you asked. To me, the meaning of life is to do as many things that, if taken away from you, would be devastating to you. That which you do should be so consequential that to not have done it or not have it would literally destroy you to your core. For me, it's my kids. Those connections, the bonds, the hopefulness for the future. I never said this, Stephen, but I don't get too emotional, but I think about death a lot more, especially in my case since October 7th last year. A lot of my friends and family were impacted by that in Israel. And I've never cried so many times than I have in the past year. But thinking about all those, kind of tears and emotions and saying, do I wish I never felt that? Do I wish I didn't have the pain if it meant I didn't have the joy of having those people in my life? And I'm not ready to die. I'm hopefully, maybe middle age. I don't know. I don't know if I'll live to 104, but hopefully, maybe I will. But I've done a lot in my life. I've done things that, I didn't think I could do when I was a kid. I've married the love of my life. I've brought incredible souls into the world. If I did die, I'm not scared. I don't want to. I'm working on my body. I'm working on my diet. I'm trying to do what's right for me, and so I can be here as long as possible. But the meaning of life is making connections. It's making these bonds such that, you hope that people will be sad, devastated, and even when you're gone. So too, the connections that I've made, I can't see my life without them. I don't want to. I don't think about it. It's morbid. To me, it's make those connections while you can. When I listened to that episode that you did with Annie Jacobson, it's terrifying, right? And you were like visibly scared in that episode. She's amazing. We don't know. God forbid. I don't think it's it's likely. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm naive. But the point is we don't know. The point is we're here now. The point is we might be alone. But that should fill us with meaning to do what we can do uniquely so.
Before you had kids, what was the meaning of your life?
It was very easy. I wanted to win a Nobel Prize.
And that's changed now.
It has. It has. Partially because my father was a great scientist. I wanted to show him up. He never won a Nobel Prize. He won a lot of awards. I wanted to show him up. Now he's dead. There's no one to prove stuff to. You should live life to impress yourself. And I feel like, if they gave me the Nobel Prize, if someday I would merit it with my team of these brilliant scientists, that's pretty unlikely, but let's say it happened. It doesn't mean what it once meant to me when I was your age. When I was your age, it was an idol to me. It was a god. Like, you win it, you're as close to scientific royalty and godlike status as possible to imagine. Much more than Oscar, gold medal in the Olympics. It is. There's only 200 or so I've ever won it. It's like a small book. And actually, I've talked to people that have won it. Actually, the foreword to my second book, Into the Impossible, was written by Barry Barish. He won the 2017 Nobel Prize. He told me, Brian, because I always ask my final question. I know we're getting to the end here. Like your final question, I learned from you. I have my own final question. It's if you could go back in the past and meet your 20-year-old self, what would you say to him to give him the courage to do as you've done, to go into the impossible? And he said to me, Brian, I would say to stop having the imposter syndrome. And I said, well, yeah, you just tell me you won the Nobel Prize. And he won't. No. I have the imposter syndrome now. I said, Barry, you're kidding me. You won the Nobel Prize. How could you possibly have imposter syndrome? He said, Brian, let me tell you something. When you win a Nobel Prize, you go to Stockholm, you meet the King of Sweden. They give you this buffet dinner. You're dressed in white tie, not black tie, white tie. You get this huge gold medal, solid gold. You get $1 million possibly. And they want to make sure you're not going to come back and say, hey, Gustav there, where's my money? Where's my prize? So they make you sign a ledger, not unlike the ledger in front of you. And it has your signature. I, Barry Barish, received the Nobel Prize. And Barry said, I took that book. The first thing I did is I turned the page. Who won it last year? Who won it the year before? Who won it? I saw Richard Feynman. I saw Marie Curie. I saw Albert Einstein. He said, I don't deserve to be in the same universe as Albert Einstein, let alone in the same book. How could they give the same prize to me they gave to him? And I realized this was like an idol to him too. I said, Barry, I've got good news for you. Albert Einstein had the imposter syndrome. He's like, you're kidding me. I said, no, Barry. He had the imposter syndrome, and his hero was Isaac Newton. Einstein said Isaac Newton did more for science and Western civilization than any human being before or since. That's a pretty tall order. How could Einstein live up to that? But I said, Barry, we'll go one step deeper. Isaac Newton had the imposter syndrome. What the heck? How could he? He was the greatest mind. He invented calculus, discovered the laws of universal gravitation, the principles of optics, invented this telescope. No. He felt wholly, entirely unworthy of his hero, Jesus Christ. So much so, Stephen, that he attempted to do the same thing that Jesus Christ did. He knew he couldn't work miracles. He knew he couldn't walk on water and turn loaves into fishes, but he could do what was, in some sense, a greater struggle, which was to die a virgin, as Jesus did. And so he did. So the lesson is, imposter syndrome is normal. Don't idolize something. Literally, you get a graven golden image of a man. Who cares? He's a man. I don't care. I take time home with my family over that on the Shabbat, as I invite you down to come to me to San Diego anytime you want.
I didn't realize that all of these great individuals felt like imposters themselves, which is, I think, will liberate a lot of people from the way that they feel. I mean, I feel this every day. Like, people introduce me on stage as like an interviewer or a podcast. I'm like, what the fuck? It just was never conceivable to me. And I know Jack's talked about the same thing. Like, it's never conceivable to me that I'd be doing a podcast and it'd be big and that people would think you're good at it in some way for some bizarre reason.
No, you're not just good, Stephen. Come on, you're at an elite level. You're
I
at
don't
Nobel
even-
Prize
what
winning
is
level.
that? What is that though? I mean, and how did that happen? I didn't go to school for that. I just sat here and started asking people questions in my kitchen, and then more people tuned in and they said, you're good at it. I'm like, what does good mean? I don't do it the same as Rogan, and Rogan's good at it, and Huberman's good at it.
I've been with them all. Look, you have a unique angle that is not replicable, but I want to leave you with a mission that kind of has guided me. And again, I've learned a lot from you. It's no secret I have the high energy opening into the impossible. Can you imagine how hard it is to take like someone who studied like some chemical pathway and some thermodynamic system to make it like the hype show that you guys open these episodes with? And I learned that from you. But Carl Sagan said, what an amazing thing a book is. In it, you have the words of a long dead author, and you're reading it to yourself. And he or she is communicating with you across the ages. Nowadays, millions of people have you in their ears, and you're communicating potentially across the generations. And you're, again, I don't want to be like a Jewish mother, but your kids, your grandkids, they're going to have access to this. It's not going to be some even a book, which is wonderful. But it's going to be visceral, audible, and it's going to have an impact you can't even imagine right now.
Creep me out. I'm like, wow.
The meteors didn't do
crazy.
it.
No, it's
The
crazy,
meteors
isn't
didn't do
it?
it.
It's crazy to think about the impact and the lasting impact that this medium might have because of the internet. But just even, I mean, even books now, books are turned into audio books, into digital books and such.
Look at this last election. This was like the podcast election, right? Not going on a podcast, going on a podcast. And there are many people that attempt to imitate what you do. And you know, I don't do it for money. I don't do it. It's not my career. I do it for fun because I want to give back to young people the way that I learned from Carl Sagan or Isaac Asimov. I read their books. It inspired me to be a scientist. When COVID hit in 2020, they couldn't do book tours. And so I invited all my scientist friends to come on. I had some Nobel Prize winners come on, and it just keeps amplifying. But I view it as, you know, for me, it's a passion project, but it's a way of giving back, returning to the community from whom I've taken so much. I've learned so much.
With that in mind, with this knowledge that what we're creating, what all of us are creating, whether you have a podcast or not, or you're just writing on the internet, whatever it might be, with the knowledge that it's going to sustain and it's going to be here potentially in many generations to come, how is that supposed to change how someone creates? Because I'm thinking, you just said that to me, I was like, Jesus Christ, that's quite profound. But then seconds later, I was like, almost like the simulation theory, I just thought, fuck it, crack on. Do you know what I mean?
That's
Just
right.
carry on with what you're doing. Because if you can get too deep into it, that you can either distract yourself or ruin yourself from the essence of what makes the thing special. So am I meant to change in any way with that knowledge?
I think you are. I think you're doing it already. I mean, you've spoken again. I've tried to study the glimpses of morsels that I can comprehend. The experimentation process is a process of fundamentally being dissatisfied with the current product, even though it's wonderful and it's great, it's top, leading in its category, but still just not being satisfied. You always want to make it a little bit better, see what works, see what doesn't work. That's pleasurable because even when you get there's no such thing as a failed experiment. I tell my students, you always learn something, and that brings you closer to truth. And that's what is so meaningful. What I thought you were going to say is, like, when you're out in public and people see you, and I asked this of Lex and Joe, I want to ask you too, as put on my podcaster hat, turn the microphone to you. There's a scene in the book Animal Farm where there's this donkey named Benjamin, and he's talking to the pig. And the pig says to the donkey, I love your tail. It's so big. I got this short little curly tail. It's good for nothing. You got this beautiful tail. It could sweep away the flies. And the donkey says, yeah, but you know what? I wish I didn't have the flies, so I wouldn't need the tail. I want to ask you, do you ever worry about the attention? Would you ever trade the attention, the fame, the lack of privacy, the intrusions, everything for the alternative? I don't know. Would you?
It's funny because when I go to answer that question and I remove all the downsides from my life, they're like glued to the upsides.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I know what you mean.
so it's always a question of like, is the trade-off worth it? It's the question that I ask myself all the time, every week, every month. And I remind myself sometimes, I said this to Trevor Noah, but he told me that it gets to a point where you can't just reverse the decision.
Right.
I try to remind myself that I could delete this podcast. I could quit Dragon's Den. I could delete all my social media channels. And I could right now go to Bali. And I was playing this out the other day in my head. I was thinking, if I say to myself that I'm optimizing for peace in this season of my life, then why the hell am I doing all this stuff? Because this is not peace necessarily. Right. And then I play out the scenario. I go, okay, so I'll move to Bali. I'll chill out there. I've got the financial means to just live there for the rest of my life. I'll chill, and then I'll start a podcast. I know you're gonna. This is where it goes. It goes. Okay, and then I'll start writing. Yeah, and then I might start making videos about what I'm writing about, because that's what I'll do.
Behind the diary.
Yeah, and I'll start painting, and you start creating again, and then if the creations are good,
you want to show it,
and then you go share it with someone, and then they're gonna buy it, whatever, and then you're back here again.
Look, I think it's what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
I think, people have a mission in life. I don't have a body, to be an Olympic athlete, but, I have a mind of curiosity. This is what you're good at. This is what you should lean in. I always feel like, do I teach my students to like overcome their deficiencies, or do I teach them to lean into their successes? I always feel like progress feels good no matter what. I'm trying to lose weight. I lose a pound. It feels so much better to lose a pound than gaining, it feels awful to gain an ounce, So the fact is, are you useful? Are you doing, Freud said there's only two things in life, work and love. That's all you got to do. You were doing your work, doing your love, take your vacation, and enjoy Bali for a while it lasts, and then come right back.
Brian, we have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're going to be leaving it for. And the question that's been left for you is, if you found out that the world was ending in 10 minutes, who would you want to speak to and what would you tell them?
Ah, that's easy. I mean, it's horrifying, but it's easy. Well, first of all, I'd call my friends at NASA and tell them to direct the giant space laser. No, it would be my wife. My wife, it's funny to think about how improbable life is. But when I got fired, I told you, from Stanford, she was actually an undergraduate there. And luckily we missed because I'm 8.5 years older than her, and I would be some lecherous 28-year-old when she was 20. I got fired. I felt it was horrible. Turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It got me a job. That job led to this experiment called BICEP. That experiment called BICEP took me to the South Pole. It took me to the brink of a Nobel Prize, but it also brought me to San Diego, which is her hometown. We would not have met. We didn't meet at Stanford. We were literally 100 feet away from each other at one point. We wouldn't have met. She's meant to be. If I hadn't gotten fired, if I hadn't been dreaming and fantasizing about experiments that I wanted to do, not to be someone else's employee, but to be my own CEO, my own world, my own laboratory, my own brand, I wouldn't have met her. I wouldn't have my precious, precious kids. There's no doubt it would be to call her.
What would you tell her?
I would just reminisce about how we met and what we brought into the world, and sure we'd laugh and cry.
Brian, thank you. Really appreciate it. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and I highly implore everybody that's listening to go and check out your show, to go and read your books, all of which I'll link below. Super fascinating. And also to go to your website if they want to be in with a chance of winning some of this space material, which is, it's amazing that I have this. I'm such a big fan of space and SpaceX and everything that's going on out there in the universe. So thank you so much for this present. You can keep the Uranus soap, but I'll keep the piece of Mars.
Sure.
The work you're doing is so important because it's helping to demystify and helping us to understand the nature of some of these really profound questions, not ever because, we're seeking to figure it all out so that we can change how we live, but just because there's so much beauty and joy and meaning that is derived irrespective of what the answer is. And I it's people like you that blow our minds open in a way that helps me, even though I'm never going to build a telescope and I'm never going to go to the South Pole and I'm never going to point it at the sky and I'm never going to seek to answer these questions in my life. But your work expands my mind. It expands my thoughts of possibilities. And as an entrepreneur, as a creator, I think that's a net positive for everyone that receives the work that you do. It's so bizarre that we're so curious about the stars, but it's such a beautiful thing. And long may you continue. There's very few people like you. And I was thinking the minute we got going today, I was thinking there's very few people in the world that are both smart, which is, I think, pretty common, but then able to communicate. And that is really, I've met you and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who have this remarkable ability to communicate science in a way that inspires, galvanizes, and sort of cultivates curiosity. It's a really wonderful thing.
Wow, I appreciate that.
And it's exceptionally rare. That combination of forces, like you said about the probability of the comet hitting the universe and that bouncing off and creating a moon, the probability of those two things happening in the same place is so exceptionally rare. But it's wonderful that we have people like you in this world of podcasting because, maybe once upon a time, it would have been harder to hear your voice, but now everybody can go and listen to you. And I highly recommend they do. Your YouTube channel is exceptional. So thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
An honor for me. Thank you, Stephen.
This diary won't change your life, but the habits it teaches you definitely will. The most unhelpful advice I ever received was don't sweat the small stuff. You have to sweat the small stuff. I sweat the small stuff. I always have and I always proudly will. Because small things that are easy to do are also easy not to do. It is easy to save $1, so it's also easy not to. It is easy to brush your teeth, so it's also easy not to. It is easy to make a 1% improvement, so it's also easy not to. Understanding the power of compounding 1% so you can absolutely change your outcomes in your life. It isn't about drastic transformations or quick wins. It's about the small
consistent actions that have a lasting change on your outcomes. So 2 years ago, we started the process of creating this beautiful diary, and it's truly beautiful. Inside, there's lots of pictures, lots of inspiration and motivation as well, some interactive elements. And the purpose of this diary is to help you identify, stay focused on, develop consistency with the 1% that will ultimately change your life. We're only going to do a limited run of these diaries, so if you want one for yourself or for a friend or for a colleague or for your team, then head to thediary.com right now. I'll link it below.
Do you really think I was deliberately partying and breaking the rules?
It's all about leading by example, isn't it?
But to say it was a party is a complete travesty.
Seeing that photo when one of my friends couldn't go to their grandmother's funeral is the most enraging thing. I think all gatherings should have been banned at number 10 because I think...
What do you mean gatherings?
Gatherings with alcohol and music and cake, you should never have allowed that to happen.
I apologise for that.
Boris Johnson! The former Prime Minister of the UK, whose reign included Brexit, COVID, and the Ukraine war.
He's one of the world's most famous politicians.
On this point of Brexit, how did David Cameron react when you said you're going to vote Leave?
He said, if you come out and support Leave, I will f*** you up forever. But if you support Remain, you can have a top 5 job in the cabinet.
But is that not a bit corrupt? And is that how the jobs are dished out in the government at the moment?
Look, I'm sad to say that this has probably been the way politics has been since the dawn of time.
And then this letter you wrote about the decision to leave or stay within the EU, which was unpublished. You seemed torn. So do you regret Brexit?
Well,
the next big thing was the pandemic.
There was a lot of stuff we didn't know. And I think that almost certainly it was a lab accident. They were looking at engineering viruses and ways that they could manipulate it. Sadly, something went wrong.
When you talk about lockdowns, you refer to them as bonkers, which is strange hearing it from the guy that put the rules in place.
Well, did the benefits of lockdown outweigh the very, very severe damage done to kids?
What do you think the answer to that question is?
Honestly, I think...
Boris, I just wanted to ask a few more things. Trump or Kamala, who's the best for international relations? How many kids do you have? Charlotte Owen, you're not related to her, are you? And then you have quite a distinct persona. People describe you as being a buffoon. When I first saw you, I thought you were a parody from Bo Selector. Is it calculated?
Well, to get people interested in politics, you got to sugar the pill.
But also, your mother said you had certain mechanisms to cope with pain because your mother is sent to a psychiatric facility when you were 10. I read there was physical violence in the house. And then at 14, your parents get divorced.
Yes, we were in Somerset. My father told us, and I was cross and said, so why did you have us then?
This has always blown my mind a little bit. 53% of you that listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to the show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Boris.
Steve.
What do I need to understand about your earliest years to understand the man that you are today?
I think the key thing is my wonderful, happy, very kind of peregrinating childhood in the company of my siblings. The key fact was that after 18 months of existence, my sister Rachel was born. And ever after, it was just a constant struggle to keep the pretense of primacy with my siblings. But I think it is probably true to say that healthy, incessant sibling interaction, competition, whatever you want to call it, rivalry, definitely played a part in my formation. And we used to make fun of it too. We used to think it was rather pathetic. We all knew that there was a culture of trying to win. So we used to say, oh, little baby wants to win. And so we competed, but we also deprecated the competition.
At that age, say before the age of 10, how does that manifest in terms of a feeling? Because you can, in hindsight, say, okay, I was competitive, but how did it feel? Because
It felt like fun.
But this idea that Rachel came along and then you were vying for attention and competition with her, how does that feel when you're under the age of 10? Because your father, at least, was very, very busy as a man. So I'm presuming he wasn't necessarily so present. I was reading that you moved house 32 times in 14 years.
Yeah, but okay. I mean, but really, I think I speak for all of my siblings now when I say that you really couldn't have had a more loving, caring, they both of them, I mean, they're both very busy, both my mother and father. Mother was a painter. My father, writer, did a huge number of things. But they did invest a lot of time in us. I mean, really a lot.
It sounded like you had a rough sort of first 10 years of life because you also had glue ear, which made you deaf a little bit.
Yes, well, I don't know. I think we need to look very carefully at I definitely had adenoids and I had tonsillitis, and I spent a lot of time in St. Bart's and had my adenoids out, my tonsillitis and everything like that. And I did have glue ear. But my deafness, there's no trace of it now particularly. And I kind of wonder whether it was in fact a cunning means to avoid my mother's questions. And I think, look, I mean, I don't know. It may be that I wasn't as deaf as all that. Do you know what I mean? Would you ever do that if your mother was asking you something and you didn't actually want to engage? And
I don't think I'm that cunning.
do you know what I mean?
Not at 8 years old. Your mother, Charlotte, she had 4 children. You were the oldest of those 4. She seems to be a really important character in your life. In fact, when I opened up the first couple of pages of the book, you dedicate the book in memory of Charlotte, your mother.
I do.
She was an artist. She had made paintings of her children, but also other things. I saw some of those paintings. I did some research on those paintings. But one of the sort of really pivotal moments in her early upbringing is that she suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder.
She did, yeah.
You're, 10 years old when your mother is put as an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital? And you're apart for 8 months.
Something like that, yes.
What impact does that have on you in terms of shaping the Boris that we know today, if any?
I mean, I remember it all very, very well. And it's hard to say exactly what impact it had on me. But I think what certainly happened was that all 4 of us, all four of the children that my mother had, we definitely kind of coagulated as a group, because it was a tough time. There were aspects of it that were tough because, she wasn't always there. And so I think it did breed a certain kind of group solidarity. And she always kind of blamed herself for not being there for the 8 months, whatever period it was. And I remember feeling very strongly that was unfair, and that she actually, did an amazing job. And, you couldn't have asked for more.
Did you notice anything unusual about her behavior before she was
Yes,
taken?
no, so the OCD thing is absolutely right. She did have that. And, it was very difficult. And I'm sure people who are watching this know exactly what it is. But she had lots of different patterns of behavior. One of them was about cleanliness. So she would wash her hands, and then she would realize that in order to turn the tap off, she'd have to touch the faucet, the spigot, and she didn't want to do that because that would make her hands dirty again, she thought. But this is a very well-known symptom, and she totally got over it. I mean, she totally got over it. She got through it.
Why was she sent to a psychiatric facility?
Well, I guess because I think that's a jolly good question. I don't really know the answer. I think she probably said that she thought she could benefit from therapy, and that's what she and my father decided was the best way forward. But I honestly don't know the answer to that.
And who looked after you while she was in that facility at 10 years old?
Well, my father was there, and we had a wonderful series of au pair girls and nannies and so on and so forth.
And at 14 years old?
And they were all great too. But I don't want to give the impression, which would not be fair, that my mother kind of was absent for long periods or wasn't a presence in our lives, because she really was.
It was more her words. I saw her doing an interview where she was talking about her belief that you had certain mechanisms to cope with the pain of her going to the facility for 8 months, but then also the divorce when you were 14. I thought those ages, that sort of puberty age where you're figuring yourself out, to get such a jolt of bad news is...
Yeah. I think that's, classically, yes. And look, I'm not going to, I think you're onto it. There was an element of self-defense that then, many kids in my position, our position, then develop. But I do insist that they both remained remarkable parents. It wasn't like we were suddenly cut adrift by either of them. On the contrary.
Self-defense.
Well, I don't know. I'm quoting her on me, by the way. So I'm quoting you, quoting her.
But you were there, so you understand.
Yeah, but it didn't occur to me at the time.
Yeah, I don't think it can for a 14-year-old. But in hindsight, as a man, you go, okay, that created a pattern.
I don't know, but but maybe. I've got nothing else to compare it to, right? Mm-hmm. You're growing up anyway. You're becoming more self-reliant. You've got to do things to yourself. So I think, go back to where it was with my brothers and sisters. I think certainly, it was another thing that drove us all together.
Why self-defense? And how did that self-defense manifest in terms of behavior?
God. I'd be the worst type of. Let me think. Well, how did my self-defense manifest? I suppose I became. Yes, unquestionably, it was painful. So how did I protect myself against that? Well, one obvious thing to do, which I suppose we all do, and I think I found the best therapy for every type of pain, emotional pain, is to try to lose yourself in your work. Emotional pain is about it's about self-esteem. So like when parents split up, the shock is, well, you can't love us that much, but if you're doing this, right, that's what it's all about. Which is not true, of course, but that's what children feel. They feel it's their failure. There's something wrong with them. And that's not true, but that's how kids feel. I suppose to protect myself against that, like, I had a natural avenue to build up my self-esteem, and that was academic work, that kind of thing. But again, another type of competition, and it is a good therapy. Work is a great reliever
or distraction.
Well, depends on your sort of theory of psychology, but I think it both. Both.
Why did they divorce? Do you know?
I think, formally speaking, what had happened was that, my mother has simply decided she wanted to make another life, and she found someone wonderful and all the rest of it. But I think that my father and mother, the weird thing about their divorce was that they both continued to be very strongly affectionate towards each other. And, you know, I'm not trying to minimize the psychological importance of any of this stuff for us as kids, but that was immensely fortifying because it was so obvious that it wasn't like they were at war. I mean, you know, they had a big bust-ups, but we felt that there was a real residue of love and affection between them, even if it was, I mean, I think the way we explained it to ourselves was that there was still a residue of love and affection, but that it was just practically impossible for them to continue. And so that was how we rationalized it. And they both found other people and were very happy.
You say bust-ups. That from everything that I've read, there was physical violence in the household when you were younger.
Yeah, well, this is something that has been alleged by, sadly, by one of my biographers. So it's a very sort of pompous thing to say, one of my biographers. Some guy wrote a book and put that stuff in. You know, what I can tell you is I have no direct knowledge of what he said. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to be disrespectful to my mother's memory, and I certainly don't want to say anything that would cause pain or embarrassment to my father. So, but what I can say is I had, as a child, no direct knowledge of it myself.
What did their relationship teach you that marriage and love was?
They met at university. They clearly loved each other, and I think if you ask my siblings, they'll tell you that. So that, you know, it was upsetting when they split up because.
Do you remember the day they told you they were?
Yeah, I do. It was. We were in Somerset, and my father said that we all had to go and up by the gate towards the engine shed. So we went and stood by the gate towards the engine shed, and we were told this, you know, sad news.
What did he say?
I don't remember exactly, but I was cross and said, you know, so why did you have us then? Because I thought, well, you know, as you know, I think it is upsetting, and kids take it upon themselves, right? And so they do think that there must be some fault or mistake in themselves, and that isn't true. I mean, you know, it's very important for kids not to blame themselves for these things. And I think that it's, you know, back to the point I was making earlier on with you. I think, you know, you do need to feed your self-esteem, and you need to get yourself back up again. And so work was my way of doing it.
I could see the emotion in your face when you talk about that moment, as if you were teleported back to that moment for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it may. I mean, look, I mean, the truth is, I'm now told in retrospect that is what I said. I don't personally remember it.
But you remember how it feels.
Yeah, but look, I mean, yes, but I really wouldn't want to over egg it because my parents were incredibly kind to each other after that.
You know, when you do this and you throw the coal in the
I'm just stoking the furnace of my
self-esteem.
Yeah.
You have quite a distinct persona. I mean, much of where you sort of first came to public knowledge was on the TV show Have I Got News for You? Yeah,
I know. I think the BBC are very they live in permanent state of horror about what they did there because, you know, I think that's one of the reasons that they have a terrible sense of corporate guilt that they unleashed this thing.
Is there a link between your persona, comedic, kind of, people often describe you as being a bit of a buffoon. I actually thought you were this is just being honest, because I feel like it's important to be honest to someone if you've said it behind their back. But when I first saw you on the screen, I was a very young man. I must have been, I don't know, 14. And I thought you were a parody from Bo Selector. Like I thought that.
I knew, yeah.
I thought it was a parody. But then I came to learn, when you did the London Mayor thing, etc., that you were a politician and who you were and where you'd come from. But the external persona is very atypical of a politician.
Right.
And your general comedic sense, that shows up in the book a lot. You were very comedic on Have I Got News for You. Is that at all linked? When did that behavior show up? Because there was 2 points of reference that I was mulling. One is things your sister said about where you sort of learned that comedy was a useful device. And the second one is something Jimmy Carr actually said to me. He said to me that, he goes, if you ever meet anyone comedic or a comedian, don't ask them if they're depressed. Ask them which one of their parents they were trying to cheer up or win favor from. And I wondered if all...
Yeah, I don't know. I think that one of the things I've tried to do in politics is to get people interested. And one of the things I've tried to do in Unleashed, which is unquestionably a mixture, there's a lot of serious argument in it, but also I'm trying to tell the story in as readable a way as possible. And you have to use, you've got to sugar the pill. You've got to, so it's like a packet of digestive biscuits.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got to have, so each of the chapters has some solid, wheat germ pabulum, but it's covered with a little layer of chocolate.
Did you sugar?
So you go down the packet compulsively, and each of those 60 chapters, I think there are 60 chapters in that book, is designed to give you a bit of both.
So you the pill that was sugared? You sugared yourself?
No, I know that there are. It's the fact of the great things that I think that we did. We took back control of our country. We went for a type of independence that people thought was impossible.
No, I'm specifically on the persona.
So there are complicated arguments about the Middle East, about as a guide to the last 15 years in politics. I think it's pretty useful.
But I worked in marketing for about 15 years, so I find it quite fascinating that right now in the world it seems that there's a certain type of atypical personality that's breaking through and being resonant. Is your persona a carefully constructed marketing strategy, or is because someone that knows you referred to you as a bit of a loner in private and a quite quiet person?
Yeah, no. I have a wonderful life. I spend my time. I do a lot of painting. I do a lot of reading and writing. I muck around with my kids. It doesn't take much to, for my cup to run over with happiness.
But all this stuff like that.
Yeah, but I know. But that's I've always had a lot of energy.
But
I've always had a lot of energy.
You understand that that's part of your persona, right?
Well, what am I supposed to do about that?
But I'm trying to understand: is it calculated? Is it something that you've thought about and you understand is effective? Because they describe you as being one of the best sort of election winners of our time.
I think what people will, I don't know. What people will also say is that I haven't really changed. Going back to your earlier line of questioning, I can see where you're going with this. You're saying, as part of the strategy for defense, do we adopt comedic persona or whatever? I don't think that was. I think it was just with my brothers and sisters in our family. There was a kind of horror of being dull or not saying anything. We had to. We all had to amuse each other.
Why?
That was only polite. Because it was more fun.
Your brothers and sisters are less amusing than you are.
I wouldn't say that. That's a very controversial thing to say.
You would say that.
I would not say that.
You would say that.
Who? I would say that.
Yeah. You think you're less amusing and less comedic.
Have you met my brother Leo?
No, I've not met him.
Well, then you've got to get Leo on this show.
But your sister...
You got to get my brother Joe.
Yes, you're
You met my brother Joe?
I've
No, honestly,
seen very-
this is
yeah,
no.
yeah.
Look, honestly, there's a serious risk of we had a wonderful childhood because, and they wouldn't deny this, because we all, you know, we had a lot of fun trying to interest and amuse each other, and to your point, probably our parents as well.
Because your sister.
That's not to say that we were, you know, we didn't do kind of charades and Christmas masks and plays and God knows what.
Jeremy Corbyn said Boris is a calculated intelligent who lives in a persona which is the opposite. Is that true at all?
No, I mean, I think that, I mean, I wish it were true in some ways, but I don't.
Because most of your most viewed videos on YouTube are you tackling a small child while playing rugby and
Yeah,
things
well,
like
no.
this.
By the way, he was. I reckon he could be much older than he looked. You
Really?
know, the guy in Japan,
The kid you tackled.
the kid in Japan, the one I accidentally knocked over in Japan.
They're all comedy videos.
Yeah, anyway.
Eton. It's pretty crazy to me. So you went to Eton at 13 years old. The crazy thing for me is that approximately 20 of the 57 individuals who have served as Prime Minister went to Eton, which is roughly 35% of the UK Prime Ministers were educated at Eton, roughly.
Yeah.
This, for me, when I read that, I go, something's broken here. Because for one school to contribute so many of the most powerful people in the land feels like a little bit of, like someone's got their hands on the scale, or there's some kind of...
That's why you need to read Leveling. You read the book, because the book contains, this is the whole theme of the book, right?
Not the whole theme of the book.
It's one of the major themes of the book. It's about leveling up.
Yeah.
And if you remember what I say about it, I don't know whether you got through that bit, but I went there on a scholarship, and it was fantastic. I was very lucky. I was paid for by Henry VI, or the legacy of Henry VI, and I remember feeling this incredible sense of amazement that there were kids from some of the most famous, illustrious families in Britain who plainly didn't have, you know, much intellectual interest, academic, you know, spark in them, and kids who'd come from backgrounds all over the country who were incredible. And my insight at school, very, very, very young, was that there's a fundamental problem, which is that there is ambition and energy and genius and talent probably completely evenly distributed throughout the UK population, and opportunity is not.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is the problem. And that is the basic problem with our country. And this country has more potential, arguably, than any other major European economy because it's so imbalanced. And if you look at the preponderance, schools like mine, preponderance in London and the Southeast in the UK economy, it's actually unlike France, Germany, Italy, Holland. It's also totally unlike the United States. And so I decided very early on that there was massive, massive wasted potential. And so one of the things, so when I became mayor of London, one of my biggest projects was really, the biggest thing we did was really all about trying to lift the boroughs that people said were locked in a permanent cycle of disadvantage and you know what I mean, the inner donut of London, Hackney, where, you know, all that, and it was total rubbish. And you can change people's aspirations, but you can then also change the culture of achievement. And I saw it happen in London. And I was only mayor for 8 years, but in that period, you really did see the city change in you know, quite a significant way. And I believe very, very strongly that is fundamentally what needs to happen in the whole of the UK. And I think that this is the job of politicians. I don't care whether they're Labour or Conservative or whoever. I think that is what we need to be doing. And I think there are very simple ingredients that there's limits to what politicians can do, but there are some simple things that politicians need to be doing to make that happen.
Has the Conservative government done well enough at levelling up the whole of the UK over the last decade?
Yes, obviously not, because it's not happening fast. It is. I mean, it is happening. Leveling up is happening.
But if you look at the
but it's nothing like fast enough.
Yeah.
And I was proud of doing things like rolling out gigabit broadband from 7 to 70%, or 69, 70% of households in 3 years, which is not bad going. I was proud of all the infrastructure stuff we were doing. I think it's a mistake to stop that. Infrastructure is crucial for leveling up. Transport infrastructure is a great equalizer of opportunity. So things like HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, we should be going on with those, in my view. And whatever my defects as a politician, I think one thing I was good at was getting a lot of stuff done fast and driving projects. But
the problem is
Eton was, back to your question, that youthful experience was, because I was also at primary school in London, and I really decided that this was, because I think our country has this problem worse than most comparable countries. But if you think of how strong the UK economy already is, then imagine what we could achieve if we leveled up, right?
Do you know this stat around Eton, that 20 out of the 57 individuals who've served as Prime Minister came from there? Isn't that just the clearest example of the fact that
it is? Yeah.
The people that are coming into politics, but also generally the people that are getting to the top in society, are starting with a unfair advantage to some degree.
I think what it shows is that, I mean, you could probably point to cultures like France or wherever, where a lot of the country is run by the people from the great schools, but yeah, I mean, fundamentally, yes. So I think that the great choice for anybody who's interested in public policy is, well, okay, this is clearly a problem. It's clearly wrong. It's clearly imbalanced. What do you do? Do you set out to launch a kind of cultural assault, Pol Pot style, on the successful institutions? Or do you say, actually, what we're going to do is try to spread opportunity? So it's more like America. And if you look at America, the growth rates have spectacularly outperformed European growth rates. There's a different sense. People have a different sense of what they can do. And we need to have a culture in the UK where people don't feel prisoners of their geography, of their background.
But that certainly is the case, isn't it, at the moment in the UK?
It's too much the case. I mean, it's less than it was.
I went undercover
I
went undercover in a school in Liverpool that was very poorly ranked on the Ofsted rankings. And I remember being in that school and just thinking, how on earth are these kids going to have a chance at...
well, they're not going to have a chance if their teachers tell them that they're never going to get into a Russell Group university, and they don't.
What I observed when I was there was I observed one teacher running from one classroom to the next classroom. This was under a Tory government, trying to teach two classes at the same time. And I remember sitting down with her because I got like kicked out of school, then I was unexpelled from school. So I had a bit of my own prejudices about school. I thought teachers were the problem. And what I came to learn from speaking to the headmaster of the school was that this is effectively run like a business. And the amount of students that choose that school every year determines how much money the school is given by the Conservative government. And the amount of the parents choose schools based on the league table, and the league table is determined by grades. So really, if you think about the structure here, the reason why they're driving kids like me to do subjects which I absolutely hated when I was really interested in business was because if they don't get me to get 12 A's to C's or whatever the nonsense is in certain subjects, they rank poorly in the league table.
That's right.
Less parents choose the school. They get less money from the government, and it's this downward spiral. And because this school was
so people are unnaturally skewed to doing subjects that perhaps
I had no
that
interest
useful?
of them. They
Yeah.
had me pushing some plastic baby around the school in health and social care when I was running businesses in the school, and I was spending so much time in exclusion unit because I was falling asleep in classrooms. It turns out I had ADHD. I wasn't interested in these things, but I was obsessed in these things. The system is designed to just sort of spread bet you across multiple subjects, and you're a failure if you're not good at that. But going back to the sort of economics of the school, I watched this teacher run from one classroom to the other, teaching two classrooms at the same time. And she told me that because less students had chosen that school this year, she was having to pay for the footballs and the pencils in her classroom. This school, I observed the quality of education. With all due respect, they did the best with what they had, but oh my God, it doesn't compare. Doesn't compare to a lot of the other schools that I've observed. And I thought, God, these children in this school are starting out life with a significant disadvantage. And much of that is just down to the funding situation. They don't have the teachers. The teachers are dropping like flies because they're getting sick, because they're understaffed. And I just thought that's such a, if we think about, what's the furthest upstream thing we can do to give people a fair shake in life so that they can become a prime minister or a CEO or whatever they want to be, it starts there. It starts with education and just giving everyone the same sort of equality of opportunity. But right now, and especially under the sort of last 10, 15 years of government,
Well, I
that's certainly not been the
just,
case.
I think I probably ought to try and resist some of that because, I think teaching is incredible. I tried to be a teacher myself. It's unbelievably difficult and demanding job, and I hugely admire teachers. When I came in 2019, we put a lot of money into the education budgets and made sure teachers were going to be paid. New teachers are starting salary of at least £30,000, and put a lot of money into further education. And actually, if you look at that period of the Conservative administration, I think most fair-minded people will say, actually, look, the UK went up the PISA rankings for literacy and numeracy. Most people actually would say that education was one of the things where things did get better. And I think the driving out of the whole academy program, I'm not remotely denying what you say about the teacher the teachers you saw being totally run ragged. They need the maximum possible support. But if you look at the data, schools did get appreciably better in this country during that period. Now, what I wanted to do was really turbocharge that and give not just school children, but also kids who'd left school at 16, the types of skills that they were going to need to compete and to make sure that business felt that they had in the schools, in the FE colleges, in wherever it was, they had the talent that they needed to invest in that area, because that's ultimately what it's all about. It's about having the confidence that the state is doing enough to deliver private sector investment. That is ultimately what will transform the neighborhood, and you get, instead of getting the vicious circle of decline that you talked about, you'll get a positive feedback loop, and parents want to move there. They want to send their kids to the school. The school get a good reputation, and so things will turn around, as they did in London. Look at London schools. I can't comment on the school you mentioned in Liverpool, but London schools really changed a lot.
I think even with the levelling up thing, one of the easiest ways to level up without building the train line would just be to improve the quality of education in these,
sure.
in these
And
areas.
I think if you look at what the Conservatives did, they really focused on that. And they focused on the curriculum, they focused on standards, they focused on quality. And I think that was very important because, it's very, very important to fund schools properly. But you shouldn't underestimate what a great teacher can achieve and the difference that they can make. And if you emphasize quality and you emphasize attainment and you focus on that. And that's why I think I'm slightly worried about what's happening now with Ofsted. I mean, I can understand why people don't like one word Ofsted gradings, but parents need to know whether a school is going to deliver.
You went to Oxford University, then you had a job as a management consultant, which lasted only a week, I hear.
Yeah, I wasn't really cut out for management consultancy, no.
You then become a journalist.
Yes.
You become a journalist for the next couple of years. You
Yes.
then appear on Have I Got News for You?
Is it now faded from the memory?
It's slightly fading. It's still a great show, but it's still slightly fading. You were then editor of
You
The
mustn't tell
Spectator.
Ian Hislop that it's faded, and
You were an
Paul
MP
Merton.
at the House of Commons. Then eventually you run for London Mayor. Did you expect to win the London Mayorship?
You see, this is the way I hadn't got the faintest idea. I mean, it seemed the thing was that I'd actually been quite an admirer of Ken Livingstone in the old days, and I thought that he had some bold and original ideas for London.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought he was good on the environment. He was good on air quality. He was good on the. I thought there was some good things that he did. But it was clear that after 8 years, you start to get a bit ragged.
Did you think you would win?
I suppose I must have done. I suppose I must have thought there was a good chance. It was a pretty exhausting campaign.
No, but
tough.
If you asked me if I thought I would win something, I can tell you in hindsight whether I thought I'd win. I did Soccer Aid this year, and I can tell you if I thought I was going to win. Did you think you were going to win when you ran?
I thought there was a goodish chance, but it wasn't obvious.
Okay.
I mean, I think the bookies didn't really have me as the favourite for a long time. I think it then changed. I can't remember exactly, but you make your own luck, right? I mean, I had to go in there and make the arguments. I mean, I think that one of the things that Ken didn't pay enough attention to was crime, and I thought there was a real issue that needed to be addressed, and that was the numbers of teenage kids being murdered, and we really, really went at that hard. And again, it was one of those things where, when I, together with a lot of other people, Kit Malthouse, Deputy Mayor, and Stephen Greenhalgh, Paul Stevenson, the Commissioner, Bernard Hogan-Howe, who followed him, we really, really tried to fix knife crime and gang crime. I used to literally lie awake at night worrying about it, because it was so on me. Every single casualty, having to talk to the parents, the misery of their suffering. We really felt it, and it was a good example of democracy, because we'd pledged to fix it, and if we didn't, we had nowhere to go. One of the things I'm proud of is we cut the murder rate in London during my time by 50%.
In 2016, at 52 years old, you become co-leader alongside Michael Gove of the campaign to take Britain out of the EU. When I look at your premiership as Prime Minister of the UK, there's 3 really significant moments, isn't there, that typically don't fall all in one person's role as Prime Minister. You had the Brexit issues, you had COVID, and you had the Ukraine war.
Yep.
Before I talk about those particular issues, in hindsight now, how do you feel about the fact that you had to contend with 3 generational crises and issues?
But that's the job of being Prime Minister.
But most Prime Ministers don't get
Sure, but
a pandemic,
but
leaving the EU.
some
and a
Prime
war.
Ministers have had wars. Some Prime Ministers have had terrible crises, sterling crises, terrible.
Do you wish you got a
economic
different
crises.
hand?
No, I think actually.
Do you think you'd still be in politics now and as Prime Minister if you got a different hand?
No, I think there are. Honestly, I think there were other reasons for that. I mean, I'm proud of the things that we did with the country. I think that it was very, people now say, Brexit war. Actually, one of the points I make in Unleashed is that if you look at it, the model of national independence that we got was crucial. So full freedom to do what we wanted in legislation and regulation. That was actually crucial when it came to that pandemic, because we were able to vaccinate faster than any other European country, much faster. I mean,
Did you think you were going to win the Brexit vote? Honestly,
When I was outside London, yes.
When
When I
you-
was inside London, no. So whenever I traveled around the country, I thought, my God, people are going to vote. And then when I got back into the metropolis, it felt very different.
So if you had to put your house on it, remain or leave in terms of the probability of the outcome, what your predicted outcome, which one would you have voted on?
Well, the polls were basically more for Remain than for Leave. But I sort of thought that our voters were more motivated. So I hoped that they would come out. I hoped that they would, that would show. But it did, but on a scale that no one had foreseen. I mean, because we had 17.4 million people voted Leave, which was the biggest number voted for any proposition in history. And, but, you know, there were plenty of times when you could be I was at St Andrews University in Scotland for my daughter's graduation day, and you really wouldn't have thought that we were going to vote Leave talking to those people there. So, you know, it depended.
Do you know what's interesting? When I was reading your book, but also when I was reading some of your previous writings, you seemed really conflicted on which way to go, Leave or Remain. Right up until you wrote your sort of first announcement piece that you were supporting Leave, you seemed to be really, really conflicted.
The reasons for not leaving were, it seemed to me, to be more to do with Britain's duty to the rest of Europe, our need to be good partners, our need not to be negative, to be friendly. Those were the things that worried me. The positive reasons for leaving.
People point at this letter, which was unpublished. You know the letter I'm referring to. The unpublished letter you wrote about the decision to leave or stay within the EU.
Is this no? You mean the article?
The unpublished article.
Yeah.
Where you said, here's some of the phrases from that piece. Think of Britain, think of the rest of the EU, think of the future, think of the desire of our children and our grandchildren to live and work in other European countries, to sell things there, to make friends, perhaps to find partners there. I like the sound of freedom. I like the sound of restoring democracy. But what are the downsides? And here we must be honest. There is the worry about Scotland, about the possibility that the English-only Leave vote could lead to the breakup of the Union. There is the Putin factor. We don't want to do anything to encourage more shirtless swaggering from the Russian leader, not the Middle East, not anywhere. And then there is the whole geostrategic anxiety. Britain is a great nation, a global force for good. It is surely a boon for the world and for Europe that she should be intimately engaged in the EU. Lastly, this is a market on our doorstep, ready for future exploitation by British firms. The membership fee seems rather small for all that access. Why are we so determined to turn our back on it? Shouldn't our policy be like our policy on cake, pro having it and pro eating it, pro Europe and pro rest of the world? So when I read that, but then I read the very vivid description you gave of that night when you were trying to make your decision in your book, Unleashed, and you seemed torn. But the guy that went out and campaigned didn't seem torn. There was a real lack of nuance in the campaign, but there's such a huge amount of nuance in both the moment you were making the decision and the articles you wrote about that decision.
There are arguments both ways, and I say it in the book, and it's certainly true that as I said just now, the case for staying is I think one about not seeming to be hostile, not seeming to be detached, but I had to decide, because being in the EU isn't like just being in a club where the rules don't change. It's a project to create a United States of Europe with a single currency, with a single parliament, and so on. And I thought that we weren't ever going to get the chance again to have national democratic independence. And as I said, so I wrote, so that article you just quoted was a sort of pastiche of a counter argument, which I wrote for myself as an exercise after I'd already written the piece to come out. And I wanted to set them side by side and to think.
But that's nuanced, but the campaign wasn't nuanced.
But if you read the other article,
yeah,
you'll see the points that I came down in favor of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about having full national independence and be able to do things your own way. And the trouble with staying in the EU was that it meant that we were going to become less and less democratic. And in the end, you've got to be able to, as a politician, you've got to be able to answer the question, who put you in authority over me, and how can I remove you from office? And the problem with the EU is there's no way they can answer that question.
But
Because they're not democratically.
Is there not a way you
elected.
can reform the relationship with the EU while being in the EU? It's interesting because I was thinking of a football analogy as you're talking there. And right now, Manchester United, my team, are having a bit of struggle, right? And my friends in the group chat are saying, do you think that we should get rid of the manager? And I'm saying, when you think about making a decision like that, you also have to factor in what you do after, i.e. who replaces the manager. So many fans will just say, sack the manager. But then the question becomes, but then what? And it was quite clear in your book that although you wanted to leave the EU, you had no idea what the plan would be thereafter. And in fact,
but what we needed to do was take back control. And so
that's like fire the manager. I'm saying, but then what?
No, it wasn't. I was just wanting to win an argument with the public about their democracy and whether they should control it or not. And I thought that ultimately we had to do that. And I think that if you look at, so going back to the points that we were talking about earlier, to growth rates in America and Europe, you couldn't say that the EU model has been economically successful. Not at all. It's got chronically bad growth rates, very low innovation by comparison with the United States. Something is not working. So whatever they're doing in Brussels to provide this great body of regulation, it's not actually delivering results for the people of Europe.
I want to be clear, when compared to America?
Well, so from 2008 on to 15, take the 15 years, 2008, 2022, whatever, to 2023.
But does that mean that the EU is doing something wrong, or that the Americans are doing something right? Because when I think of America, I think of insane innovation. I think of
a bit of both. A lot of both. So the Americans, by the way, would never dream of trading away national sovereignty over anything. They just don't. They never in any way.
NATO is a bit of a pact where they've formed.
The Americans have complete hegemony in NATO. I mean, that's the.
But they joined forces to make the sum greater than the parts.
Yeah, but there's no the EU provides a body of new and a continuously evolving body of new law, which the British Parliament can't change. And so to get back to why, I mean, I'm not pretending it wasn't a difficult decision. It was a difficult decision for the reasons that we've gone into. But I wanted our country, to be legislatively free again. And at the heart of the book, you talk about the pandemic being the most difficult thing. It was very, very difficult. And it was very difficult to persuade the British public very difficult to find ways of stopping the spread of the disease. But one thing we did better than any other European country was vaccinate. And one reason we were able to vaccinate so fast is because we had regulatory freedom of exactly the kind. I mean, it was a complete fluke, but
we'll talk about
exactly the kind.
We'll talk about that.
That I had advocated.
We'll talk about that.
And so that for me was absolutely crucial. And then there are plenty
we'll talk about that. I just want to
examples.
I need to make sure I'm clear, because if I'm not clear moving forward, then my audience aren't going to be clear. This idea of like freedom. If we take the analogy of a parachute, if I cut the cords, I'm free, but I'm also in danger unless I have a paraglider waiting to catch me. And my point here is, I understand all the big emotional words, that freedom and take back control, etc. It sounds compelling to me, but as I said with the football analogy, what's the plan thereafter? And I think I actually don't want. I don't want the quote unquote cutting.
You talk about the parachute, right? And cutting the cords of the parachute. Actually, it was the other way around. It was because we'd come out of the EU that we were able to equip ourselves with a parachute faster than anybody else. And we were able to get out of the burning plane faster and to get to ground safely faster because we'd taken back control of our regulatory freedom. And that meant that by March 2021, we'd vaccinated 45% of the adult population, and of the older people, I think we'd done almost 180 over 80. We'd done almost 100%, and that was incredible. If you remember, we had.
We'll talk about the vaccines in a second.
In those early days, but the two things are connected.
No, yeah, I understand.
In those early days, we had thousands, or up to 1,000 people dying every day, and so it was incredibly important
just on
that we were able to give elderly and vulnerable people in the UK a protection from a lethal disease.
On this point of Brexit, though, in your book, you say you almost sort of disconnect yourself from the fact that there had to be a plan associated with the decision, because you seem almost angry that people would expect you to have the plan, even though you led the campaign.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying to make the connection between Brexit and the real world and why Brexit delivers value.
Was there a plan for leaving?
But in 2016, I think what you're really saying is, what was our plan for the referendum outcome? So everybody who campaigned to leave, were we expecting to win? Were we expecting to form the next government?
Let me quote your book. This is good for promotion for your book, so you like this. Never at any point in that campaign did we, Boris and Michael Gove, discuss a future leave-based government, because we did not imagine that we would have to be in charge of government. The government's stated policy was to implement the referendum result. It was a referendum, not an election. We had no plans for government, no plans for negotiations, because it was not our job. And insofar as the next few days were chaotic, which they were, it is utterly infuriating that we should be blamed. It was up to the government to announce the plan to withdraw. It was up to the government to begin negotiations. So this is a huge issue, because in the context of business,
why? Yeah. Because I think it's a fundamental misconception. When a government decides to put something to the people in a referendum, the government is not saying, if it goes against our, any particular position, will disappear.
But the government said they wanted to remain.
In France, for instance, François Mitterrand had a referendum on, I can't remember which, I think it was the Maastricht Treaty, or it was one of the treaties that he lost the vote, and he didn't resign, he didn't disappear. Plenty of European leaders have had referendums on the EU, and they've gone against them, but they haven't vanished from the scene. And so, let me put this the other way around. Imagine that Gove and I, or the whole of the Leave team, had been specifically campaigning in the Leave vote to form the next government and to install ourselves as the rulers of the country. People would have said, this is not about, you're talking, all your arguments are designed to advance your political careers. You're not talking about the issue of leave or remain. You're talking about a plan to take over the government.
I know,
and so it was totally ludicrous.
I'm not a politician. I'm just a member of the public.
I'm trying to explain why that was not possible.
I get it, but as a member of the public, I think if you're leading the charge for an outcome, you must have looked a couple of steps further to think about the implications and the reality of this outcome. Like, you must have had, we can do it like this, we can negotiate like this.
I assume that the government would have a white paper that they were going to bring forward the options for the country and a plan to negotiate and a plan to do what they said they were going to do.
But the government, including your friend David Cameron, said this is a really bad idea. So one would take from that the plan is not a good one, that they've looked at all the available options post-leaving and there's no good options here. So if the people in charge were saying we should not leave, there is no good plan, shouldn't we have listened to them?
Well, no, because I think they were wrong.
The way that I sit as a member of public is I see two people stood at a cliff edge, and you got one guy called David, one guy called Boris. And David has said, listen, I'm taking you to the cliff edge because it's your right to make this decision, but do not jump. And this other guy called Boris is going, jump. I would assume that Boris knows something about how we survive once we start falling. But to find out that Boris had no plan and thought David was going to pull out the parachute, for me is like,
well,
David Cameron didn't have a plan.
The problem was that we then found ourselves, because David, Prime Minister Cameron, then disappeared from the scene immediately. As I described in the book, we then had a chaotic period where we had to work out what the hell we were going to do, because it was clear that somebody was going to have to take over and lead us through it.
Did David Cameron react badly when you told him, when he thought that you might be voting to leave? Because you talk about in the book he swore
Yes,
at
I
you.
did. He did. But I mean, I describe it in the book.
What did he say to you?
He said, I said, look, I was really struggling with this because I didn't see how I could consistently, because he'd offered me, he said, if you come out and support Remain, you can have a top 5 job in the cabinet. I couldn't work out what a top 5 job was. And then he said, and then I said, well, look, I was finding it very difficult because I'd written lots and lots of articles pointing out the democratic problems of the EU. And, finally we had a chance to resolve this. And I was thinking of coming out for leave, and I, didn't know how to put it to him, but that was the truth. And he said, this isn't about articles, this is about the future of the country. And I said, well, I agreed it was about the future of the country, but I was still thinking come out for leave. And he said, well, if you come out for leave, he said, I will, and I apologize for using his name. He said, I will fuck you up forever. And which I thought was quite a big, sort of promise to make.
He said he was going to fuck you up forever.
Forever. And so I immediately went back home after that evening, and cycled back from my office in City Hall and talked to my family, my kids. And one of my kids said immediately, well, you've got no choice, then you'll have to come out for leave. So, I mean, I put that in I put all that in really just to show you that there were very good arguments for having a quiet life.
Do you know what's interesting in that is when I read that part in your book, there was 2 things that I thought. The first was him offering you a top 5 job if you followed his opinion. Yeah. Is that not bribery? And is that how the jobs are dished out in the government at the moment? If you do what I say, I'll give you a top job. If you do what I say, I'll make you health secretary or defense secretary. It seems like but it seems like someone who's not in government, it seems like a really corrupt way to dish out jobs. Like if you go in with me,
it wasn't clear. You've got to be fair to Dave. It wasn't clear what job he was offering.
But top 5 is what, defense secretary, health secretary.
Well, I don't know.
PMs were top 5 jobs, so there's really 4 remaining. It's probably, you thought in the book you talk about potentially defense secretary.
I don't know, but yeah. I mean, look,
but is that not a bit corrupt? Is that not like the definition of corruption? Because if I was to my employees,
my own view about, I think it's a huge mistake to do that kind of thing, because there are always far more people that you end up thinking that you should be making a promise to than there are jobs you can possibly give. So the best thing in those circumstances is to say nothing.
I've always wondered this about government, and I've never understood it, is how does someone become the head of a department when they have no prior experience in it? Like, you made Matt Hancock health secretary.
How did Margaret Thatcher become Prime Minister or Secretary of State for Education when she had no previous experience?
How
did Tony Blair become Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister thing I understand.
But how did Tony Blair become a shadow minister when he had no experience?
You tell me, do you think this is a good system?
Well, I'd say this is a really, really important point, because I think that there is I don't know, I do worry that it's quite hard to persuade, really good administrative types to go into politics. And, you see it the whole time. It's called Diary of a CEO, right? And you see it the whole time. You see loads and loads of, I can think of plenty of examples of top business people who tried to become politicians, and it just doesn't seem to work. And I don't know. I mean,
can I have a guess?
Go on.
Well, if I look at the data, I go, if 35% of them come from one school, Eton, and then there's jobs being dished out based on, if you take my opinion, I'll give you a top 5 job. I go, I understand why I could never get in, even if I was the best candidate, because it's not being done based on who's the best candidate. It's being done based on like the old boys club. Like, I'll do you a favour, I'll lift you.
Well, not under the Labour Party, presumably, or any other party, and not under the. I mean, most Conservative cabinets.
So just under the Tory party.
No, I think under any party, I think that business people do, for reasons I find hard to put my finger on, they don't necessarily flourish in that environment. And
who flourishes?
What I worry about is that the only people who are really going to start doing it are people who are willing to go through a lot of, public attack. I think because
sociopaths.
Well, I mean, the fact. So look, one of the interesting things that's happened recently is that social media has become very, very virulent, and I mean, I don't read it myself, but I think it becomes very oppressive for politicians and also for journalists. And I think journalists, they get a lot of shellacking and a lot of abuse if they're not thought to be taking one line or the other, or going easy on someone. I mean, there's somebody who's going to interview me for this book.
Laura.
And you look at, and she's a very, very good journalist, but you look at the stuff that she gets online about, her being an inquisitor of mine or whatever. It's appalling. It's really appalling. And I think that it's also the same for MPs. I think that they get very, they think that if it's a choice between having a life where I can, avoid this sort of stuff and, having a wonderful existence doing something else, or putting myself through this.
On the point of that I said, thinking that it's related to the fact that people have got their hands on the scales, they're pulling their friends up, it's a bit of a boys' club. Is there any truth in that?
I think, look, I'm sad to say, Steve, I think that there's probably been the way politics has been since the dawn of time. I think that politics has tended to be factional since the dawn of time. I think it's tended to be just sad, but I think true. The good thing is that in the end, the people who are really successful are the people who get things done that the people want done.
Do you think it's a magnet?
So it's a magnet for very determined characters who are willing to put themselves through a lot.
Sociopaths
to get things done. Well,
and narcissists.
Have I used those words before?
No, but that's the kind of person.
You're making me worry. It sounds like you're quoting me. About
yeah, maybe you have.
But yeah,
the kind of person that I think would be compelled and succeed in such an environment.
I think you have to have a pretty thick skin.
Okay.
But because of the way it works, the people who actually succeed are the people who really can drive something forward and deliver it.
Closing off on Brexit, 62% of British people view Brexit as more of a failure, according to YouGov, and 9% consider it more of a success. According to YouGov as well, 46% of British people say there should be a second EU referendum in 10 years, compared to just 36% that say it shouldn't be. And according to,
okay,
let me just finish the stats, then you can respond. According to the UK's real gross added value, the GVA, a measure of the size of the economy, they say there's approximately 140 billion less in 2023 in the UK economy compared to if the UK had stayed in the single EU market. According to the same thing, they say that 300 billion has been wiped off the value of the UK's economy by 2035. And my last stat here is a report from the Centre of European Reform in 2023 estimates that the UK GDP was 5.5% smaller by mid-2023 compared to a scenario where the UK had remained in the EU. This equates to an economic loss of about 40 billion annually. And just as a business owner myself, I was looking at some stats around what business owners think. And about 33% of small businesses reported that Brexit has made it harder for them to trade with the EU due to increased paperwork and things like this. And the London School of Economics said that Brexit added 6% to food prices between 2020 and 2023. With all of this in mind, do you regret Brexit?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, honestly. So we've outgrown Germany, France, from 2016 onwards. Certainly outgrown Italy since 2016 onwards. Last time I looked, Germany and Italy were both members of the EU. And when the statistics that you give, I mean, they are dwarfed, for instance, by COVID. Even if you accept that, which I don't necessarily, that Brexit has caused problems, it's also caused massive opportunities because we were able to come out of the lockdown earlier than any other country. Remember, we came out of lockdown in July 2021. We ended all restrictions, and that meant that we had the fastest economic rebound of any G7 country, and that would not have happened, in my view, without the assistance of Brexit freedoms.
Do you know the OECD? Do you know what that body is?
Yes.
They say the UK is the only major rich economy that remains smaller, poorer than prior to the pandemic, and Brexit may be a factor in that. And the government's independent watchdog, which I know you know, the Office for Budget Responsibility, thinks the UK will ultimately be 4% worse off than it would have been had it not voted for Brexit. In business, everything is a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. So you must be able to identify the trade-off that the UK has made for all of the upsides that you claim Brexit has delivered. So I think it's intellectually honest of anyone to be able to identify both sides of the argument here. So what is the trade-off? What has Brexit cost us? What's it cost us?
What's it cost us?
Yeah.
Look, I think that it's certainly true that the way that some of it is being managed by some of our European friends is unnecessarily bureaucratic at the moment. I think that will get better. I accept that criticism. I don't think it's the end of the world. But I do think ultimately the advantage of being free to do your own thing, free to run your own country, to control.
You didn't
your
tell
own
me a
borders.
trade-off.
No, I have. I
No, but the impact for us in the UK.
bureaucracy.
Yeah. For me as an average citizen, what's the trade-off?
What's the downside?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's certainly true that some businesses are finding it harder to. There is paperwork that I don't think there needs to be, and we need to fix that. But I think that we have technological solutions to that. I don't think that we need to be part of a European empire of law, get an ever denser and more detailed empire of law, controlling our freedom and stopping us.
Is there an
doing things
economic
differently.
trade-off?
I don't think. I think that ultimately we will be richer as a result.
But in the near term, we're going to be poorer.
But again, people were very emotional about this. And look, can I just remind you, before the referendum, people said that, and no one ever holds these people to account, people said that there would be millions more unemployed, right? Do you remember that? People said there would have to be an emergency tax-raising budget if the people voted to leave the EU. Actually, when I ceased to be Prime Minister, unemployment was at a 50-year low, and we had 620,000 more people in paid employment than before the pandemic began.
My point was about the economic
I'm just saying that people make all sorts of prognostications about Brexit.
But the stats that I read, do you believe them, that there's an economic struggle in the near term? People
said that we would have a million people on the dole queue because of Brexit.
Okay, fine. But do you believe that there's in the near term?
But they're now saying it's confirmation bias, right?
But you said we will be richer eventually. So I'm saying
I hope that we will if we do the right thing.
Sure. So in the near term, do you think there's a little bit of struggle to get through economically as a result of Brexit?
I think that's certainly the case if we make the mistake of staying. I mean, which is what Keir Starmer and the Labour Party wants to do, is staying in alignment with the EU. They basically want us to be rules takers.
Okay.
I think that's a huge, huge mistake. We should go for freedom.
I don't know how to say this to you in a way that you're going to understand, but Perfect Ted is banging. I'm an investor in the company. I drink it every day. The whole team drinks Perfect Ted every day. We have a Perfect Ted fridge in the office. Here's why I like Perfect Ted. Typical energy drinks used to give me these crashes. And as a podcaster, the last thing you want to do is be crashing in a conversation. The founders of Perfect Ted wanted to create an energy drink that wouldn't create that horrible crash cycle that many of us go through. So they used matcha as the energy source. And somehow they also made it really, really delicious. They've just come out with this new flavor called Juicy Peach. And it is banging. If you try Perfect Ted's Juicy Peach and it's not banging, feel free to get in my DMs and cuss me out. You can pick it up at Tesco's or Waitrose, or you can get it online. And here's a secret that you've got to keep to yourself. I'm going to give you 40% off Perfect Ted, just so you can try Juicy Peach yourself. Go to perfectted.com and at checkout, put in the code DIARY40. I'm going to leave that up for some time, not forever. That's perfectted.com and then use code DIARY40 at checkout. When you try it, make sure you tag me on Instagram and say, Steve, you were right. It's banging. The next big thing was the pandemic. This was once you'd become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And you have this pandemic begin to roll in. I was looking at the way you describe that situation in late 2019, early 2020 in your book. And it appears that you had no idea of the severity of this virus that was rolling into the shores. When was the first time you heard that there was a virus that had come in from China?
Whatever the date was, I think it was either end of 2019, beginning of 2020. I can't remember exactly when, but there's a day when I'm walking through the lobby of the House of Commons with the health secretary, and he says, I'm worried about this this Chinese virus.
Was Matt Hancock the right person to be handling that? Because that is a generational, once in a lifetime health issue.
Yeah.
And in hindsight,
I think he did a very good job. Yes, I think he was very energetic.
Was he the best person to be handling it?
I think he did a very good job, and I think that.
Was he the best person to be handling it?
Look,
in hindsight.
I certainly think that yes, because I think that he had the right mixture of energy and realism. Don't forget, we didn't know about the disease. We didn't know how lethal it was. We didn't know how contagious it was, and we didn't know exactly how it was transmitted. There was a lot of stuff we didn't know.
Some quotes from your book here. You said, the problem wasn't that I was ignorant to zoonotic diseases. The problem was that I felt I knew all about them. After more than 30 years of writing about or dealing with new zoonotic diseases, I felt I knew my SARS and my Ebola, so to speak. And I concluded two things. First, that these novel zoonotic plagues tend to sort themselves out. And second, that the greater risk of destruction from attempts to stop them by politicians was their sort of attempts to contain the diseases, that the prevention would probably be worse than the cause in some respects. So when Matt Hancock started talking about a new coronavirus, possibly from bats and the risk that it would sweep the country, it was hardly surprising that I felt I'd heard this all before. Little did we know.
Yes, I think that's I'm being very honest there about as I am throughout Unleashed, about my state of mind, because I'd covered in great detail the salmonella and eggs panic when millions of chickens were slaughtered needlessly. I'd covered the bovine spongiform encephalopathy panic, mad cow disease, when vast proportion of the UK dairy cattle herd was slaughtered, probably needlessly. The livelihoods of farmers were destroyed. I'd been mayor of London when we were threatened with the bird flu.
So you didn't think it was a big deal?
And we'd laid on stocks of Tamiflu, which turned out not to be necessary. So I'd seen SARS come and go, Ebola and so on. And in each of these cases, what seemed to have happened was that there'd been a rational anxiety about the risk of a zoonotic disease, often from Asia or wherever, we would get we'd do our best to get ready, and then it mysteriously leave us almost completely unaffected. I remember the swine flu.
Is that what you thought was going to
epidemic.
happen in this case?
And I didn't know.
Yeah.
Of course I didn't know. What I was trying to do was to give you
Context.
the context and the state of mind that I think a lot of people were in when they heard about COVID.
When did you call China? February, I had it as February 2020. There was a call you made to the leader of China.
To Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would have called him. I mean, it'll be in the book.
And you were sending supplies.
Yeah,
to
that
help them.
stage,
Yeah.
we were still sending
Supplies to help them.
We were sending protective
What did he
equipment to
say
help
about the virus?
Well, I said, look, my memory of the conversation is hazy now, but I think congratulated him on what seemed to be his efforts to control the disease, but said I was anxious about what was happening in these wet markets, because at that stage we were given to understand that the disease had occurred spontaneously in a market in Wuhan.
What did he say?
And I can't remember what he said to that. I don't think. Look, I mean, he was a president of China. I don't think he wanted to, particularly the implication that China was in any way at fault, and I can't totally understand that. But I now think that probably wasn't right. I now think that almost certainly it was a lab accident, or it was as a result of something that went wrong in that lab.
Can I ask about this? Because this started as a conspiracy theory that is now widely accepted as the probable likely outcome. Why were they messing around with a virus in a lab in Wuhan?
Well, you may well ask. I mean, I think they were.
Why do you think they were? As someone that is so far away from why people do such a thing.
I genuinely don't know, but I think that they were, science. The point of science is to keep pushing back the frontiers of human knowledge everywhere, and to see what they could do.
Do you think it was a weapon?
I didn't have any reason to think so. I think it was a terrible accident. I think the thing escaped from the lab. I think they were looking at engineering these viruses, just looking at function gain of the virus and ways that they could manipulate it. And sadly, something went wrong. That's my best guess, and a lot of people now seem to think that.
You called Trump around this time as well to speak to him about it?
I did.
Yes. What did he think?
Well, I mean, he took the firm view that China had a case to answer, but so did a lot of people.
And in the book, you talk about the World Health Organization's response being seemingly hesitant because they wanted to keep Beijing in favor.
Yes, I think a lot of scientists were anxious about cheesing off the Chinese. And I think a lot of scientists, because China is very heavily involved in the support and sponsorship of a lot of academic research and so on. So there was a sort of hesitance. I felt, I mean, I might have been wrong about this. My impression was there was a sort of gingerliness about seeming to finger the Chinese too much.
On lockdowns, it's interesting that I was reading in your book that around the 8th of March, you start to see what's going on in Italy. And I think we can all vividly remember those scenes from those Italian hospitals where there was patients in the corridors being pushed around on trolleys and there was not enough beds. And I think for me as well, that was one of the big moments where I realized, watching it actually play out on Twitter, that this was an incredibly serious situation, something that I'd never seen in my lifetime before. Was that the penny drop moment for you, that this wasn't just another bird flu? Or
I was very anxious about it because I knew the Italian healthcare system. I thought it was broadly excellent, and I remember when one of our kids had fell into a swimming pool in Italy once. When everybody was having a lie-in, it's about the most shattering thing that could ever happen to you, and the Italian pronto soccorso came. And they were unbelievably good. They were so fast. They were so. And I thought, if the Italians are having problems with this thing, and frankly, our population is about as elderly as theirs, then this could be very, very serious. So I think that did really register with me. And so if you look at and obviously I would defer completely to the inquiry into all this under Dame Heather Hallett. But if you look at what happened from then on in, you see a series through March up till the 23rd of March, you see a series of intensifying steps to try to get people to take precautions.
What I observed, I saw that in the book, and you kind of have the stages that you break down that you went through from that moment onwards. What I observed, though, and I think this is probably a fair estimation or a fair description of what happened, was there was indecision. Because it seemed like there was facts coming from one ear, facts coming from the other ear, and there was almost a bit of paralysis. And when you look at the rest of the European numbers, which I was looking through yesterday, about when different sort of European markets made that decision, the UK appears to make the decision to lock down much slower than all the other European nations. Slower to close the schools, the shops and events seem to be later than our European counterparts. And Matt Hancock went on to say that
don't forget they were ahead of us in the epicurve anyway.
Mhm.
So they were. So you mentioned the Italian situation,
Yeah.
and they were already ahead of us, and we could see that we were going to have to bring in measures, but again, this will be for the inquiry to comment upon, but it's pretty clear to me that we couldn't reasonably have instituted these measures in the UK, which were novel and draconian, in advance of the scientific advice or opinion.
But on
and
the
that's
point,
what it would have been.
them being ahead of us isn't relevant, because the chart I have here shows how many days it took us to take decisive action after the third death. And it shows that for all of the European nations. And when I was reading about the information you were getting from scientists on this end and from other people in politics, it was so contradictory that I think I was guessing that that's what caused the indecision, and also your own sort of philosophy towards shutting down society.
We had this group called the Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies, right? The
Yeah.
SAGE. And they were, so we were going to be led by the science. And we basically I decided that we had to follow what SAGE advised. And for a long time, to your point, they hesitated about schools because of all the disbenefits. And if you remember, the argument was that if you went too early, then there was a risk that you'd have to keep doing it because the public would lose patience with the lockdown. And there was a secondary argument, which was there would then be bounce back. If you went too early and you kept on for you'd then take the measures off, and the virus would flare up again, and which indeed did happen throughout the course of the pandemic. So the scientific advice was, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was particularly confused at that stage. I think it was they were struggling to assess exactly what to do, and there were different views within the scientists about certain things, like
Matt Hancock said that we could have saved 30,000 lives.
Masks and so on.
Is that true? Matt Hancock said, if we'd locked down earlier.
I can't say that for sure. I've no way of knowing that. But what I can say is that to have locked down earlier would have been to have gone beyond, to have anticipated scientific advice. It would not have been something. And I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a scientist. I was being asked to, what was on the agenda was imprisoning the whole UK population. It wasn't something the scientists were yet recommending.
In the book, you seem to question whether those lockdowns really even worked.
So I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, so depends what you mean by work. I think that they certainly did have a role in stopping the spread of the disease, and they helped probably to turn down the curve of the disease. Probably, almost certainly. What I find very difficult to gauge now, and again, this is for Heather Hallett, is to what extent was it the lockdowns what did it, and to what extent was this going to happen naturally as a result of the natural parabola?
And you suspect it was going to happen anyway?
I'm not. What I'm saying is that to some extent, or to a large extent, it was perhaps going to happen anyway. Perhaps, and given that it was perhaps, or it was to a large extent, perhaps going to happen anyway. The question is, did the benefits of lockdown outweigh the very, very severe damage done to kids' life chances at school, which we talked about earlier?
What do you think the answer to that question is?
I think that we did the right thing.
You think we did the right thing?
I think we did the right thing. But I'm conscious that there are lots of people who disagree. And what I hope is that the COVID inquiry will say that, yes, we did do the right thing.
In your book, when you talk about those measures, you refer to them as bonkers. There's sort of different areas.
Yeah, I think that's later. That's by the time, that's when we got to the tiering system.
The tiering system, you talked to it as bonkers, and you seem surprised that people would follow this stuff, and that they wanted to follow this stuff, which is strange hearing it from the guy that put the rules in place. You think the tiering system was bonkers, and you were surprised.
I'm talking about the hindsight, right?
Yeah.
So at the time, it seemed, so we had a situation. So coming out of the first lockdown, so in the summer of 2020, and going into the autumn, and things start to get more difficult again, we have a situation where in some parts of the country, in places like Leicester or West Midlands or wherever, Northwest,
you have the tiers.
You've got a problem, which is that some areas haven't really seen that COVID really go down anything like as much as it went down, say, West Country, Cornwall.
Yeah. Was that a bad idea in hindsight?
And so you had people saying, why the hell should pubs be closed in Cornwall?
Yeah.
When there's no COVID, and just because there's transmission in Bolton or wherever.
So was that a bad idea in hindsight?
Well, no, it was a good idea in principle because after all, it was crazy, it seemed. But the problem was that it was very, very difficult to draw the boundaries. And as soon as you said, well, this bit of Leicester's in tier which whatever,
it was
people
impossible.
People went crazy
because
it was very invidious, and it seemed
on a human level, when you're leading the country during a pandemic, and you're getting these numbers every day that people are dying and that people are sick, and then I know you got sick yourself. What is there a mental toll on you throughout that period?
Well, I think it was so.
As
you will discover, Unleashed, I like it when I can go forward and when I have the positive projects to do. So it was very, very difficult when I was constantly having to shut the country down, constantly trying to stop the transmission of the disease by these very, very crude methods. But once, by end of 2020, we had the prospect of vaccination, then my mood totally changed. Because then I had something.
My question was about you as a human being. When you're dealing with tragic news and this escalating pandemic, what's the human toll? If I'd been a fly on the wall in your hardest moments throughout that pandemic, what would I have seen?
Well, I think it was certainly pretty tough. I had a bad bout of COVID.
What was the hardest day outside of getting the illness yourself? What was the hardest day for you throughout that period?
I think that, I think there was a lot of tough times, but I think having to go back into lockdown in the end of 2020 was pretty awful. Because it was we'd really, really hoped that tiering would work. And, some people still think it could have worked. But it just was, I couldn't take the risk.
The quote from your book that I pulled out, which really shocked me, was the real question, I suppose, is why on earth the public so avidly craved these rules and why they were so willing to have their doings circumscribed in such a rabbinical detail. In their complexity, they were also like a kind of religion, detailed rituals you just obeyed, Leviticus like, in the hope of salvation, because science was slow to help us. On the 13th of September 2021, your mother, Charlotte, passes away, while at the same time you're dealing with all of this fallout and the recovery from the pandemic. That's a tough moment.
Yeah, but that's the same for any person and any in any walk of life. You know, that's always a very, very tough moment. I think that you know, to your point about the people, why do people obey the rules so much, and my feelings about that. I think
No, I'm asking about your mother here.
yeah,
So
sorry.
your mother passed away in September
Yeah.
2021, and you don't touch on it so heavily in the book, the circumstances of that, but that must be a particularly tough moment for a person that's dealing with all of these other social issues and political issues at the same time.
Yes, I know, but I mean, I think I suppose the point I would make there is that is our common human lot, isn't it? And yes, it was tough for me and my brothers and sisters, my family. Very, very, very tough. You know, we miss her to this day, all of us. But you know, a lot of people were suffering a lot throughout that pandemic, and a lot of people lost loved ones. And you know, I had to be very, very mindful of what was happening every day in households across the country, and I had to try to, and I had a desperately difficult, because one of the interesting things about being prime minister is the way it works now is how much of it is just funneled upwards, and you know, you have to take those decisions. There's nobody else who can do it for you.
Do you remember where you were when you found out that Charlotte had passed away?
God, I think it was I was driving into London. I'd been out on a visit.
And was it unexpected? her passing?
Well, I mean, you know, she'd been ill for a long time with Parkinson's, and she had various complications associated with Parkinson's. And she'd had a bad scare about a year previously. So no, I couldn't say it was, you know, medically. I could not say it was medically totally unexpected, no.
Did you have a chance to grieve her passing?
Well, I certainly did grieve her passing. But if you mean, did I sort of
Process it, mourn it.
you know, to the best of my ability, yes.
Are you good? Are you a natural at that sort of thing? That sort of emotional, I guess, connection with yourself?
I think it's probably go back to some of the earlier things we were saying. I mean, I did grieve, and you know, I do miss her, and like all my brothers and sisters, I do miss her today. But you know, I also had a huge amount to think about and to get done, and we just had to, you know, we had to do it.
Many members of the UK population were also mourning and grieving at the same time, and I think that's why the Partygate scenario, which you talk about in the book, was so enraging for many people. Because as someone who, again, is not very close to politics like myself, it's optics here, you know. And I think that's really the issue when you've got people who are unable to see their loved ones because of the situation with funerals and the pandemic. Even the suggestion that there was a rave going on in Number 10 is the most enraging thing that I think anyone could say.
But there wasn't a rave going on. I mean, you'll find it all there. You'll find it all in Unleashed, and and I feel desperate about it, and I really do. And I understand, you know, completely why people got so enraged. I really do understand that, and I did my best to try and, you know, I think I mishandled the whole thing, the revelations as such as they were,
but also reality.
But you know,
because at the end of the book, you do seem to highlight that you could have done things to.
Well, what I could have done, I think. So I wonder why I commissioned Sue Gray to conduct an investigation into it. I mean, I was informed that she was a politically impartial and a model of sort of, obsessed with probity. And neither of those things now seem to me to be true.
I've got a picture here. There was 17 parties that were alleged during the sort of Partygate time frame. And one of the pictures that leaked to the public was this picture of you enjoying some cheese and some wine, I believe, at 10 Downing Street. Now, as again, a member of the public, I look at this, I look at some of these key dates. I know you were fined for one particular date, which was your birthday, I think, where you were raising the glass of wine with some colleagues.
No, I wasn't. You see, people say this kind of thing, and
was it the AIDS leaving drink that you were fined for?
No, I wasn't fined for that.
What were you fined for?
I was fined for going into stand at my desk in the cabinet room between meetings.
With the glass of wine?
No, not with a glass of wine. And several members of staff were also there, but they were people I saw throughout the working day anyway.
But this picture,
and just can I just, because people think that I had a cake, and that we didn't have I didn't have a cake. I didn't even see a cake. To say it was a party is a complete travesty. It was about the most lugubrious event. It consisted of people who were part of my normal working life. That picture that you're pointing to there was the Metropolitan Police did look at that, but they decided there was no offence committed, because what you've got is people sitting outside, as people tried to do during those times, because there was much less risk of infection.
Let me just read some of this stuff. So 15th of May 2020, cheese and wine at Downing Street. Approximately 349 people had died from COVID that day in the UK. Mr. Johnson was photographed sitting with his wife Carrie and some staff at a table with wine and cheese in the number 10 garden. At this time, COVID restrictions said that people could not leave their home without a reasonable excuse. Let me just read this and then I'll...
But we were, I was at that is my home.
I know, that's
the garden I was supposed to be
using.
That.
May 20th, there was a bring your own booze party on the same day that 308 people died from the pandemic. And you attended for about 30 minutes. You say it was 25 minutes. And then the 19th of June was your birthday.
Sorry, can I just go back over there? I mean, none of this washes with the public, because they all think that we were, having dancing around and getting drunk.
And the last point,
we weren't.
12th of April, Johnson announces that he has been fined £50 by the police. Do you know what it is though? It's all about leading by example, isn't it? And you know this, yeah? I think my opinion is that whatever's going on at number 10 needs to be the extreme demonstration of the perfect example, the extreme demonstration, because of course you're going to be attacked. You know that.
Yeah.
Of course, if you sneeze, you'll be attacked.
And I say that in
that's what I'm saying. So
what we should have done, and I say is I should have said to everybody, look, people are going to say, because it was in fact, as I tried to explain, impossible to maintain perfect social distancing in the office environment that we were in. People were working round the clock. And I think that I should have said something to the staff, like, people are going to be out to get us. For God's sake, do not only obey the rules, but be seen to obey the rules. Now, we had, all the signs in the corridors and stuff like that. I think that there were a lot of people by that stage who were perhaps not altogether friendly to me, who wanted to stitch me up.
That's fine. That's fine. But honestly, I can't help but believe, because I try and remain pretty impartial on these things. So I try and apply common sense as like a business person. But
do you really think I was deliberately partying and breaking the rules?
For me,
do you really think that?
For me, seeing that photo when one of my friends couldn't go to their grandmother's funeral, and seeing that there's people drinking and appearing to have a whale of a time, just in this photo, but also the other photos where you're cheersing with wine, I go, you should never have allowed that to happen. Do you know? And I think you agree with me. You agree with me?
Actually, no.
Because you said at the end of the book, you said, I should have said to my whole team, don't even let them appear to be breaking the rules.
In the course of almost 2 years, people working around the clock in number 10 in conditions of great proximity to each other, there were going to be moments when, of course, when colleagues are going away, when you raise a glass to them, unless you're going to ban that.
I think you should have.
Well, that's a point of view.
Because I just think
if you banned alcohol in 1940, we wouldn't have won the Second World War.
I think Prime Minister during a pandemic, I think you just have to be the most extreme example.
But we got a ban on alcohol in this country?
No, I think genuinely.
If we'd banned alcohol in number 10 in 1940.
Mm-hmm. I think all gatherings should have been banned at number 10 because I think.
Sorry, but we were gathering. That means banning meetings. So what do you mean gatherings? Gatherings
with alcohol and music and cake, I think should have been banned. And
I've tried to explain to you that there was no cake, or I saw no cake. I was at no event where there was music or dancing. That's total nonsense. Now, maybe those things took place, but they certainly didn't take place when I was there. I think one of the mistakes I made was beginning the whole thing by issuing this general apology. And so what happened was, the people think that there was
do you still apologize?
Vomiting, there was...
Do you still apologize?
I don't apologize for allegations of vomiting or fistfights because they turned out not to be true.
What do you apologize for?
And, well, insofar as people broke the rules on my watch, and as far as I'm responsible, of course I apologize for that. But what I'm saying in Unleashed is that the problem with leading with a blanket apology was that it then meant that absolutely any allegation that was, I mean, you've just made a couple yourself. Any allegation that was then made about, and in Sue Gray's initial report, that she had to change it. She said there was a violent altercation and vomiting, and somebody vomited. But both of those things turned out not to be true.
You said you made the mistake in your book. You say you made the mistake of issuing pathetic and groveling apologies over the scandal, which made it look as though we were far more culpable than we were.
Which is just the point I've just made. So, because I think because it looked as though, but by issuing a sort of universal apology, it meant that any subsequent allegation, people assume, well, that must be what happened. And you to be fair, I kind of get the feeling that's what you think. And
no.
And that was largely my fault because I seem to be inadvertently validating.
The apology is not.
But I seem to be validating everything that people said about what was going on. And what was actually going on was that people were working unbelievably hard, round the clock, to get a lot of very difficult things done.
I know.
And
for me,
and actually, what the things that they were successful in are very creditable. I feel badly about them because they deserve
on page
praise.
705 of your book, you say, in retrospect, I should have done more to protect myself and the rest of Whitehall against Partygate-type allegations. I should have said to the entire staff, perhaps in a letter, about the vital importance of not only obeying the rules, but also to be seen to be obeying them and reminding. And I think that is actually my point, which is apologies, I think, are good things. I think people should apologize.
No, but I'm trying to explain. If you apologize in advance for the problem was that a lot of things were said about staff in number 10 that weren't true and weren't fair to them. And my blanket apology looked as though I was validating and accepting all those criticisms.
Okay.
Which I think was not, in retrospect, I think I should have waited to see exactly what people, said and what was established to be true. And then I should have apologized for what actually happened. Do you see what I'm saying?
I understand.
And also, I want to stick up again for those officials who were working around the clock to sort out the government's and the country's response to COVID. And when it came to it, did an absolutely outstanding job. And I don't want to.
I understand.
Because you've been very patient with me. You've allowed me to talk for almost 2.5 hours, and for what I thought was going to be an hour's show. So you've been heroic in putting up with.
We're wrapping up now, but I just wanted to ask a few more things. These are personal questions that I have.
Please.
So, one of the things that no one knows about you is how many kids you have. Why is this such a widely debated subject? I've never sat with a guest on my show where
I don't know why they were so widely debated. It's a matter of. I have 8 children. It's
you have 8 children.
Matter of public record.
Okay, I don't know why is everyone so obsessed with the amount of kids you have?
Search me, Gov.
Charlotte Owen, you're not related to her, are you?
No,
She's not a former lover?
no.
Okay. I asked my friends some of the things they wanted
No,
to know about you.
she's but it's in the book. Read all about it in the book. She is a very capable advisor.
And what happens next for Boris Johnson? Are you going back into politics?
I live a life of blameless rustic obscurity.
Do you want to get back into politics?
I think that
the
as I say in Unleashed,
the chance of the frisbee decapitation. Yeah, I get it.
As I say in Unleashed, you should only do things if you genuinely think you can be useful. At the moment, I think I do a lot of painting. I'm having a great time living in in the countryside. I got my hands full doing all sorts of things. And
next question, quick fire.
Yeah.
Trump or Kamala, and you can't sit on the fence.
All British prime ministers, including ex-prime ministers,
Yeah.
are constitutionally obliged to be friendly with whoever.
Who's the best for international relations?
Whoever the American people decide. And that is the right thing. And that our dwindling audience would not expect.
Who's best for stopping the wars? Who's better for stopping the wars, Kamala or Trump?
I mean, if you read Unleashed.
I did read it.
Okay.
And I saw your interview on GB News, and you seem to think that Trump would be a better...
Well, I think what I'm saying is that you should beware of some of the kind of anti-Trump prejudice about his handling of foreign policy. And there are very good, when he was president, he took some tough decisions and projected a sense of American strength and purpose. And that's, but I make no further comment than that.
And we have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're going to leave it for.
Oh, right. Okay.
And the question that's been left for you is, success often comes at a price. And one of those is the relationships we lose along the way. Which relationship or person did you lose in the pursuit of your success?
Maybe. You seem to, the longer you live, the more you realize that, you can have what seems to be a complete, terrible sundering, and then lo and behold, things cheer up and you're friends again. And so, I mean, look at Michael Gove.
You got to answer the question. Which relationship or person did you lose?
But the answer to your question is I don't regard any of the termination, any rupture. I don't regard any rupture as final.
No one's ever swerved this question, so you're not going to be the first.
I don't regard any rupture as final.
Which relationship or person did you lose in the pursuit of your success?
They are not lost. I don't.
Give me a person. Give me a name. We've never had it. This is a long-standing tradition. No one's ever swerved this question.
I had a rupture with Michael Gove, but then in 2016. But then with heroic optimism, I put him back in the cabinet, and there you go.
Boris, thank you. Thank you for your time. And
thank you.
I'm going to link this book below so anyone that wants to read
Unleashed
can get the book. It'll be linked below. It was your writing style is exceptionally engaging. I think everyone that's interviewed you from the ITV to GB News has said the same thing. The book is linked below. If you're interested in the subject matters we've talked about, but many more, it's an exceptionally long book. Some 700 and...
I don't know. I got it wrong. I think it's over
771 pages. 772 pages.
With the index and the thanks. Yeah.
An incredibly detailed book into all of the key issues that have happened over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and some touches of what happened in your life before. Link down below. Boris Johnson, Unleashed. Thank you so much, Boris.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been an honor. I think, do I get a prize for it? I think that must be, how long was that interview supposed to be? Because
I don't know. They're always 2, 3, usually they're 4 hours. Sometimes they're 4 hours.
Oh,
so,
I see.
Yeah. Isn't this cool? Every single conversation I have here on the Diary of a CEO, at the very end of it, you'll know, I asked the guest to leave a question in the Diary of a CEO. And what we've done is we've turned every single question written in the Diary of a CEO into these conversation cards that you can play at home. So you've got every guest we've ever had, their question, and on the back of it, if you scan that QR code, you get to watch the person who answered that question. We're finally revealing all of the questions and the people that answered the question. The brand new version 2 updated conversation cards are out right now at theconversationcards.com. They've sold out twice instantaneously, so if you are interested in getting hold of some limited edition conversation cards, I really, really recommend acting quickly.